before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. They say the Adirondacks are ancient, older than the Rockies, older than the Appalachians, old enough to remember things we've long forgotten. And when the wind moves low through the pines and the fog lays heavy on the ground, you start to believe that something's watching you from behind the tree line, just beyond your reach. Something that's always been there. We rolled into Moose River Plains late one October afternoon, the kind of cold that clings to your bones already creeping in. My name's Grant, 42 years old, and I've been full-timing in my RV for over a decade. My wife Elena was riding shotgun. We'd been through all sorts of places. Bad weather in Oregon, engine trouble in Utah. One time, we even got surrounded by wild pigs in Texas. But nothing prepared us for what happened out there in upstate New York. Moose River Plains is part of a wilderness area. No hookups, no cell service, just a winding dirt road, 23 miles long, peppered with primitive campsites scattered in the forest. The kind of place where silence isn't quiet, it's loud with meaning, with warnings. We chose a spot down near Helldiver Pond. Just us and the pines, the stars, and that still, endless forest stretching in every direction. A man came out of the woods as we were leveling the RV, an older guy, maybe in his 60s. Leathered skin, sunken cheeks, green flannel, and eyes like chipped ice. "You folks just get here?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Looking for peace and quiet." He nodded, but his face didn't ease. "Well, you'll find it here. Just don't go wandering after dark." "Why's that?" Elena asked, and her voice had that easy, friendly tone she always used with strangers. The man's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Things move different in these woods when the sun goes down. Paths don't always lead where they should. And then he turned and walked back into the trees. We laughed it off later over grilled sausages and whiskey under the stars, called him the Adirondack Crypt Keeper. But that night, something changed. Just past midnight, I woke to a tapping sound. Not on the door, not on the windows. It was on the roof. Tap, tap, tap. I thought maybe a branch had come loose or a raccoon had climbed up, but when I stepped outside with my flashlight, everything was still. No wind, no raccoons. Just frost beginning to settle on the ground and an oppressive quiet that made the skin on the back of my neck rise. I climbed onto the roof, expecting to scare off a critter. But there were footprints, small, bare, human. They led from the rear ladder to the center of the roof and then vanished. No smudge of a heel, no slide where someone might have jumped, just ended like the person had dissolved into air. I didn't tell Elena. She'd already been uneasy about the place. The next morning, though, she noticed something strange. "Our fire pit," she said, kneeling beside it. "We cleaned this out last night." I crouched beside her. The ashes were warm. There were fresh burn marks and a half-charred bundle of twigs wrapped with thread. "Someone lit a fire here," I whispered. We packed up to leave that day, but the RV wouldn't start. Battery was fine, fuel was fine. I checked everything I could check, but the engine wouldn't turn over, like something had settled deep inside it, locked it from within, and still no signal. We stayed another night. We had no choice. I tried to keep things normal for Elena, card games, hot cocoa, reading, but I could see it in her face. She was afraid. So was I. The forest was too still, like it was holding its breath, and that night it exhaled. Around 3 a.m. I heard whispers outside. Not the wind, not animals. Voices. Children's voices. I looked out the blinds and saw them. Figures, pale, thin, moving between the trees, some crawling, some walking. One stood at the edge of the fire pit, just watching the RV, watching us. I didn't open the door, I didn't move. I just waited, heart pounding like a drum in my chest, and then they were gone. Next morning, I found symbols carved into the trees around our site, circles with lines through them, crosses shaped wrong, faces, almost long, eyeless things with crooked mouths. I found the old man again, deeper in the woods where I'd gone looking for higher ground and maybe a signal. "You stayed the night," he said, like it surprised him. "We didn't have a choice." He nodded. "They know you now." "Who?" I asked. He looked up through the branches. "They don't have names, not anymore." I asked him what we were supposed to do. He told me something I've never forgotten. They're drawn to noise, light, movement, curiosity. "You want to leave?" Then stop looking, stop asking, pretend you never saw them. I left him there in the woods, didn't even see which direction he walked off in, just turned around and followed the path back to the RV like he told me, not looking at the trees, not listening to the whispers I thought I heard behind me. And then the engine started, just like that. We drove the entire road out of Moose River Plains without stopping. 23 miles of dirt and rocks, the trees pressing in like jaws. We passed one other camper on the way out. A small Class C pulled off the road, no one in sight. Their door was open, clothes on the ground. I didn't stop. When we hit pavement again, we drove until we found a signal. Called a mechanic in Utica, had him look the RV over. Nothing wrong with it. He said whatever was causing the engine issue must have just worked itself out. Maybe it did, but I don't think that place ever lets you go. Not really. You leave something behind in those woods, and they leave something in you. You can laugh if you want. Say it was just paranoia, cold weather, isolation. But I've been RVing across America for years. I know the sound of an engine. I know the way people move. And what I saw in those woods, what I felt, that wasn't a dream. That was real. People go missing up there, look it up. Year after year, hunters, hikers, campers. Some vanish from their tents in the middle of the night. I have no signs of struggle, no animal tracks, just gone. Like they walked into a place they weren't supposed to find. So here's what I learned, and maybe it'll help you. Don't chase shadows in old forests. Don't camp where the map gets fuzzy and the trails wind too perfectly. And never, never ignore the warnings of locals who speak softly and look like they've seen ghosts, because maybe they have, and maybe they were lucky enough to get away. We still travel. We still camp. But I don't laugh at the old stories anymore. I don't scoff at signs carved into trees or bundles of twigs wrapped with thread. I know better. Because I've been to Moose River Plains. And I came back. But part of me still hears the tapping on the roof when the wind gets quiet. Part of me still sees those pale figures standing in the trees. And part of me wonders if we really made it out at all. We parked our rig weeks later at a KOA near Lake George, fully lit, families nearby, the kind of place where you can almost forget that the world ever had dark corners. But even in that light, I could feel the shadow trailing us. I caught Elena staring into the woods one night, just past the edge of the camp where the lights didn't quite reach. She didn't say anything, just stood there, like she was waiting for something to emerge. "What are you looking at?" I asked her quietly, even though I already knew. "Nothing," she said, "just thought I saw someone." Even after we'd gone states away, the quiet moments carried weight. We'd hear small things, clicks against the roof, murmurs near the windows. Sometimes the lights would flicker for just a second. Not often, not enough to be sure, just enough to remember. I read somewhere that fear doesn't come from not knowing what's out there. It comes from knowing exactly what's out there and realizing you have no way to stop it. That's what the Adirondacks gave me. Not a story, not a ghost tale, a truth. We weren't meant to camp just anywhere, no matter how adventurous we feel. There's a reason maps have blank spots and signs say, primitive. We think because we've got 35 feet of fiberglass and steel that we're safe, untouchable. But an RV doesn't protect you from everything, not from silence that grows too thick, not from whispers that know your name, not from things that learned long ago how to slip between trees and tap on roofs just to remind you they exist. It took time, but we changed how we traveled. No more going deep into wild areas without people nearby. No more off-grid unless we've done the research, talked to locals, checked with rangers, and no more ignoring our instincts. That lesson, the one no travel blog or RV lifestyle influencer tells you, is that freedom always comes with a price, and sometimes the bill doesn't come due until long after the engine starts again. We met another couple that winter down in Pennsylvania, parked beside us for a week. Rob and Jenny, good people, mid-50s, full-timers like us. Over coffee, Rob told me they'd had a strange experience in the Green Mountains. Lights circling their camper at 3 a.m., the dead animals found neatly arranged in a ring around their fire pit. When they reported it to the rangers, the response was a little too calm, like it wasn't the first time someone had told that story. "I just wish someone had warned us," he said. And I realized we were becoming those people, the ones who'd seen something, made it through, and now carried the burden of knowledge. The ones who show up, quiet but alert, watchful of tree lines, cautious about campfire conversations. So that's why I'm telling you this. Not to scare you away from RVing, not even to make you avoid New York, but to give you a warning. The same kind I wish we'd gotten before rolling into Moose River Plains. Because places like that don't need monsters to be dangerous. All they need is your attention. All they need is your curiosity. I used to think the most dangerous things out there were bears, weather, or getting stranded miles from help. But now I know better. The real danger is camping in a place where something ancient never stopped watching, where the trees remember everything, where the paths shift behind you when you're not looking, where voices rise in the night and vanish with the frost. And the scariest part? No one will believe you. Not until they go there themselves. Not until they feel the cold tapping on their roof, see those small footprints, or hear children whispering outside their camper at 3 a.m. And by then, it might be too late. So listen to the wind when it changes. Listen when the birds stop singing, when your gut twists and the dog won't stop growling at the tree line. Leave. Don't second guess it. Because the most dangerous RV camping place in the United States isn't dangerous because of what it shows you. It's dangerous because it makes you doubt what you already know, that you're not alone out there, that the woods are not empty, that something watches, waits, and follows, and sometimes it leaves with you. We spent Christmas in Georgia that year. Warm weather, blinking lights on the awning, the smell of cinnamon candles inside the RV. We tried to make things feel normal again. Elena decorated a little plastic tree. We FaceTimed our families, smiling, laughing like the shadows behind us had faded. But something about us had shifted. Elena started journaling, said it helped her process things. But sometimes I'd catch her staring at the blank page for hours, pen never touching it. Like writing it down might make it real in ways she wasn't ready to face. Me, I became obsessed with reading campground incident reports. You can find them. Some official, buried in local archives. Others show up on forums or in fragments on Reddit. Most people don't connect the dots. They think one missing hiker in 2016, one camper disappearance in 2020, a weird report of lights over the trees in 2022. Completely separate events. But when you start seeing the patterns, they start to whisper back at you. And a lot of those whispers echo from upstate New York. I read about a woman named Trisha who disappeared from a primitive site at Wakely Pond. Just one tent, no signs of forced entry, food still cooking in a pan over the fire. Her partner woke up to find her gone. No footsteps, no trail, just gone. The ranger's report said she likely wandered off, but her boots were still inside the tent. I read about a group of 3 who made a fire ring near Cedar River Flow and found their car 20 feet from where they parked it the next morning, moved, untouched, tires spotless like it had never driven the mud road in. One of them never camped again. I read too much, enough to know we weren't alone. And that's when the dreams started. Not nightmares, just quiet dreams. Always the same. I'm standing at the edge of our old campsite near Helldiver Pond. It's snowing lightly, even though we were there in October. The forest is quiet, not a single animal sound. In the dream, I'm always barefoot. I look down and my feet are planted in the snow, warm. The air doesn't feel cold. In front of me stands a tall figure, not threatening, just still, covered in what looks like bark and moss, and it raises one hand slowly, pointing. Not at me, behind me, and I always wake up before I can turn around. I never told Elena about those dreams. Not until she told me hers first. "I'm lost in the woods," she said one morning, her voice distant, coffee shaking in her hand. "But it's not night, it's bright, like the trees are glowing. I keep hearing you calling my name, but every time I follow the sound, it moves further away, and I keep finding myself back at the RV, but it's empty." We were being followed, not in the way you think, not by a person, not even by a creature. It was more like something had attached itself to the memory of us, to the scent of fear we left in that place, and now it echoed through our lives like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. We finally went back, not to Moose River Plains, but to the edge of the Adirondacks. We stopped in Indian Lake, rented a small cabin for a few nights. No RV, just a test. We told ourselves it was about facing our fear. Closure. But there's no closure in places like that. Just things you learn to live with. We walked the edge of the wilderness, didn't step inside, just close enough to feel the trees breathing again. It was winter. Snow packed hard on the trails, ice forming long daggers from the eaves of the buildings nearby. The woods looked so peaceful from a distance. But peace isn't always the same thing as safety. We stopped near a trailhead where a local hiker had vanished 3 years before. A cross was planted in the snow. On it, someone had written, in childlike handwriting, "Some paths are made for others." I turned to Alina. Her eyes were wet, not from the cold. "We're not coming back here again, are we?" she asked. "No," I said. "We got what we came for." Because sometimes the point isn't to solve the mystery. Sometimes the lesson is knowing when not to chase it. I don't care what kind of rig you have. I don't care if you're off-grid capable or if your Wi-Fi booster can pick up satellites from the moon. None of that matters when you're out past the last light and the trees close behind you. You want to camp safe? Stay aware, stay connected, research the legends, respect the whispers. Not every forest is waiting to be explored. Some are just waiting to be left alone. And the most dangerous place isn't the one with the most bears or the steepest climbs or the deepest snows. It's the one that wants you to believe nothing is wrong. It's the one that makes you feel comfortable. That's the trap. We still camp, but different now. Intentional. Alert. There's a weight in our eyes that fellow full-timers sometimes recognize, the ones who've seen things too. We nod in silence at each other, that mutual look that says, you know, you've been there. And maybe that's the community we never talk about, the quiet one. The network of RVers who've heard the whispers, seen the figures, made it out with stories they don't tell at the campfire. Because they know that some stories aren't warnings, they're invitations. So let this one be a warning. Let this one be the voice that tells you what the others won't. Not every beautiful place belongs on your bucket list. Some should stay on the map in red ink with the words, "Do not return." We returned once. That was enough. And now, every time I turn the key on the ignition and hear the engine hum to life, I whisper a small thank you. Not to God, not to luck, but to the forest for letting us leave. Because there are places in America where RVs go in and never come back out. Places where silence is deeper than sleep, where something waits beneath the roots. And if you ever find yourself driving north on Route 28 and you see a hand-carved sign pointing toward Moose River Plains, ask yourself one thing. Do you feel lucky? Or do you feel watched? Because there's a difference. And in New York's most dangerous RV camping place, the difference is life or disappearance, your choice, your rig, your road, but some roads were never meant to be driven. That winter, we avoided the Northeast entirely, took the RV south down through Tennessee and Alabama, drifting further into the sun. But even under the Spanish moss and along the banks of the Gulf, I'd sometimes look at the woods off to the side of the road and feel it, that soft tension, the kind that wraps around your ribs and doesn't squeeze, just waits. As if the forest was listening. It wasn't paranoia. Not really. It was memory. And memory doesn't stay locked away when it's fed by something. One night in Mississippi, camped near DeSoto National Forest, I stepped out to take a walk. Elena had fallen asleep watching a movie. The air was warm and wet, the kind that makes your skin sweat even when you stand still out maybe 30 feet from the RV. Flashlight in one hand, other in my pocket. No reason, just restless. I paused at the edge of a tree line, flashlight pointed down, listening to the cicadas scream, and suddenly, dead quiet. Everything stopped at once. Not a single leaf moved, not a single bug hummed. It was like stepping into a vacuum. The same exact stillness we'd felt in Moose River Plains, the kind that feels too intentional. And in that moment, I understood something that chilled me more than anything else had. It wasn't the place that was dangerous. It was what moved with us. Whatever had followed us from New York hadn't stayed behind in those woods. It didn't live in a grove or a hollow or a burned-out ranger station. It lived in the silence. That same stillness, that same vacuum we'd felt in the pines, it was here too. Miles and miles away, another state, another climate, but the exact same void. It was like a calling card, like something letting us know we're not done yet. I didn't tell Elena. I went back inside, locked the RV door, lay next to her with my eyes open until the sun came up. After that, we made rules. We no longer camp alone, always within earshot of others, always near some kind of road traffic. We don't dry camp in the middle of nowhere anymore, no matter how pretty the spot looks. And we don't ignore the signs. I'm not talking about danger, no trespassing signs. I'm talking about the real ones. The birds that go silent too fast. The ground that crunches like glass even when there's no snow. The time that slips past too easily when you think it's only been 10 minutes and it's somehow 2 hours later. We started documenting it, not to scare ourselves, but to create a map, a personal chart of red flags. We call it the quiet zones. And the truth is, there are more than you think. They stretch from New York, down through Appalachia, sweep into parts of the Ozarks, thread through lonely corners of Utah, and even touch the desert out west. These are places where stories don't match facts, where rangers retire early, where people disappear and everyone quietly agrees not to bring it up. If you've been RVing long enough, you've felt it. That unease you couldn't explain when pulling into a beautiful free campsite, that nagging sense of being watched, even with no one around for miles, that chill at 3 a.m. when the dog growls and you tell yourself it's just a raccoon, but you don't really believe it. That's not superstition. That's not your imagination. That's survival trying to wake you up. Because the deeper you travel into this country, the more you realize something primal still lives here. It hides behind folklore and local tales, disguises itself as myth, but you feel it in your spine, especially if you listen close. I used to think of the forest as a place of healing, a refuge from the concrete sprawl. I still do. But now I understand that refuge doesn't mean safety. Nature isn't here for our comfort. And there are places so old, so untouched by human eyes, that they don't care if you're careful. They don't care if you mean well. They just are. There's a part of me that still wants to go back. Some nights I even dream about it, the road winding up into the pines, the fog rolling in over the ridge, that first breath of thin, cold air when we opened the RV door in Moose River Plains. There's beauty in those places. A terrible, ancient kind of beauty. But there's a reason they feel sacred, because they're not ours. And when we camp there, when we pull in our rigs and set up our foldable chairs and pretend we belong, we're trespassers. Visitors in a world that doesn't need us, that never did. So if you ever find yourself at the edge of a place like that, don't look at the trees. Look at the silence, listen to what it's not saying, and ask yourself, are you really camping, or are you being watched? There's a cost to curiosity. We paid it. Not in blood, not in tragedy, but in awareness. In the quiet burden we carry now, every time we drive down a long forest road and the trees lean a little too close. And the lesson we earned the hard way, the most dangerous RV camping place in the US isn't marked on a map. It's marked on your soul after you've been there, and it never lets go. My name is Alex Whitaker, and in 2016, I took my RV down to the rugged expanse of Big Bend National Park in Texas. Being a history teacher, I figured a solo trip might give me some new stories to spice up my lectures, or at least a decent tan. The open road was my escape from the usual grind of grading papers and dodging PTA meetings. I packed the essentials: canned beans, a stack of unread novels, and my old guitar. Nothing says midlife crisis like a man and his RV heading into the desert. As I drove deeper into the park, the scenery shifted from scrubby desert to towering canyons. The Rio Grande snaked its way through the landscape, a shimmering ribbon dividing two countries. I found a secluded spot near the river, far from any designated campground. Peaceful and, more importantly, no Wi-Fi. Just the way I wanted it. Setting up camp, I felt the wave of contentment. No emails, no student excuses about why their homework was late. Just me and the vast wilderness. I strummed a few chords on my guitar, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. The sun began to set, turning the sky into a masterpiece of reds and oranges. As night fell, I lit a small campfire and heated up some beans. The crackling fire and distant howls of coyotes were my only companions. Just as I was contemplating turning in, a faint light flickered atop a nearby ridge. Probably another camper or perhaps a park ranger. I shrugged it off. After all, the desert is big enough for the both of us. The next morning, I decided to hike along the riverbank. The air was crisp and the scenery was postcard perfect. About an hour in, I stumbled upon something odd. A campsite that looked like it had been hit by a tornado. A tent lay torn open, and belongings were scattered as if someone left in a hurry. Amid the mess, an old weather-beaten journal caught my eye. Curiosity piqued. I picked it up. Flipping through the pages, I realized it belonged to someone named Jude Delgado. His last entry was 2 days prior, mentioning explorations of nearby caves and strange symbols etched into the walls. The final line read, "I feel like I'm being watched." Well, that's not creepy at all, I muttered. Maybe Jude was auditioning for a horror novel. Still, a chill ran down my spine, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. On my way back, I crossed paths with an old man carrying a heavy backpack. He had a face like worn leather and eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. "Morning," I greeted. He gave me a long, searching look. "You out here alone?" "Just me and my RV," I replied with a grin. "Figured I'd get away from it all." He nodded slowly. "Be careful. The desert has a way of revealing things you'd rather not see." Great. Cryptic warnings from the desert sage, I thought. Next, he'll tell me to avoid the haunted cactus. "Thanks for the tip," I said aloud. "I'll keep an eye out." He stared a moment longer before continuing down the trail. Odd fellow, but I chalked it up to too much sun and not enough social interaction. Back at camp, the unease lingered. To distract myself, I decided to drive into the nearest town for supplies. The town was the quintessential dot on the map. A gas station, a diner, and a general store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 50s. At the diner, I ordered a coffee and struck up a conversation with the waitress. "Say, you wouldn't happen to know a Jude Delgado, would you?" I asked. She paused, her smile fading. "Can't say I do. Why do you ask?" "Found his journal near an abandoned campsite. Thought he might be a local." She leaned in. "People go missing out here from time to time. Vast place, easy to get lost." "Comforting," I said with a half smile. "Remind me to leave a breadcrumb trail back to my RV." She didn't laugh. "You be careful now. Stick to the main roads." "Will do," I assured her, though my mind was already spinning tales. As I left, I couldn't help but notice the few locals in the diner were eyeing me with what seemed like suspicion. Or was it pity? Either way, it was time to head back. That evening, the desert felt different. The silence was heavier, the shadows longer. I decided to stay inside the RV and dive into one of those novels I'd been meaning to read. Around midnight, a tapping sound jolted me from the pages. It was coming from the rear of the RV. Probably just a desert squirrel auditioning for a horror movie, I thought. But then I remembered. No trees, no squirrels. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped outside. The night was still, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. I walked around the RV but saw nothing. Just as I was about to chalk it up to my imagination, I heard footsteps crunching behind me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice betraying a hint of nerves. "Silence." I swept the flashlight around. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure in the distance, but it was too dark to be sure. My heart pounded. I backed toward the RV. A whisper floated on the wind. "Not safe here." I spun around. No one. "All right, Alex, either you're losing it or someone's playing a very unfunny joke," I muttered. Back inside, I locked the doors and decided that sleep was the best escape. Morning couldn't come soon enough. Stepping outside, I stretched and tried to shake off the night's weirdness. Then I saw it. Scratched into the side of my RV were the words, "Not alone." "Well, isn't that just peachy?" I said aloud. "Maybe it's the desert's way of saying welcome." I decided then and there to pack up and move to a different spot, or better yet, head home. As I started the engine, I glanced in the side mirror. A man stood about 50 yards away, watching me. It was the old man from the trail, but his expression had shifted from mysterious to menacing. "Time to go," I whispered, putting the RV in gear. Driving down the winding road, I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe the locals didn't like outsiders. Maybe this was their way of scaring me off. If so, mission accomplished. Rounding a bend, I slammed on the brakes. A pickup truck was parked across the road, blocking my path. There was no way around it. Before I could react, two men emerged. The old man and a young guy with a scruffy beard and cold eyes. Both held rifles pointed directly at me. "Step out of the vehicle," the younger man ordered. "Is this about my extended warranty?" I quipped, hoping humor might diffuse the tension. "Now," he barked. With no other option, I stepped out, hands raised. "Look, if this is about camping fees, I'm happy to pay." "Empty your pockets," the young man demanded. I tossed my wallet and keys to the ground. "Take whatever you want," the old man sneered. "It's not about what you have, it's about what you know." Okay, you've lost me, I said, heart pounding. You found Jude's journal, he stated. Jude, the guy whose campsite looked like a tornado hit it? Yeah, I found his journal, didn't know it was a crime. The younger man stepped closer. You read it? Just enough to realize the Yelp reviews for this place are severely lacking, I replied. He didn't appreciate the joke. You think this is funny? Not particularly, I admitted, but I've always been told I laugh in the face of danger. Bad habit. The old man raised his rifle. Enough. We can't let you leave. Wait, hold on, I said, thinking fast. If you let me go, I'll forget I ever saw you, promise. Cross my heart and hope to, well, you get the idea. They weren't buying it. Desperate, I feigned a stumble, reaching down as if to steady myself. My hand closed around a fist-sized rock. In one swift motion, I hurled it at the younger man's face. It struck him square on the nose. He screamed, dropping his rifle. Seizing the moment, I bolted toward the scrubland. Bullets kicked up dust around me as the old man fired. Adrenaline surged. I zigzagged, hoping to make a harder target. Split up, I heard the old man shout. Ducking behind a cluster of rocks, I tried to catch my breath. This is not how I envisioned this trip going, I thought. Next time, all-inclusive resort it is. I needed a plan. Peering around, I saw the younger man circling wide, blood streaming from his nose. The old man was methodically checking hiding spots. Spotting a fallen tree branch, I grabbed it and waited. As the younger man approached, I swung with everything I had. The branch connected with a satisfying thud. He crumpled to the ground. One down, I whispered, though I knew the old man was still out there and armed. I picked up the younger man's rifle. It felt heavy and unfamiliar. Should have paid more attention during those video game tutorials, I mused. Making my way back toward the road, I kept low. The old man was nowhere in sight. Reaching the RV, I climbed in, started the engine, and floored it. As I sped down the road, the old man appeared ahead, standing in the middle of the path, rifle raised. A shot rang out, shattering the windshield. Glass sprayed everywhere, but I didn't slow down. Sorry, no time for roadblocks, I muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. At the last second, he dove out of the way. I sped past, heart pounding, knuckles white. Hours later, I reached the park entrance and found a ranger station. Bursting inside, I tried to explain between gasps. The ranger stared at me, eyes wide. Calm down, sir. Tell me exactly what happened. After relaying the events, law enforcement was called in. They found the younger man unconscious where I'd left him. The old man had vanished. A search of the area uncovered shallow graves, remains of several missing persons, including Jude Delgado. The reality was grimmer than I could have imagined. Turns out Samuel Granger, the old man, was a former military survivalist gone rogue. He believed the desert was his domain, and that outsiders were trespassers to be eliminated. His accomplice, Jacob Mills, had a record of violent offenses. Together, they had been preying on unsuspecting campers for years. Well, that's one way to discourage tourism, I remarked when the detective briefed me. You're lucky to be alive, he replied. Trust me, I don't feel particularly lucky. They advised me to stay in town until they could ensure my safety. Jacob was in custody, but Samuel was still at large. A few days later, I received a package at the motel, no return address. Inside was a single item, Jude Delgado's journal. Tucked between the pages was a note in scrawled handwriting. The desert keeps its secrets. Well, that's not ominous at all, I sighed. Law enforcement took it as a threat. They offered protective custody, but I declined. I think I've had enough of small towns and deserts, I told them. Time to get back to grading essays on the Industrial Revolution. I returned home, the comforts of suburban life never more appealing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel was still out there, lurking in the vastness of the desert. One evening, as I was locking up my house, I noticed a figure at the end of the street. For a moment, panic surged, but as the figure approached, I realized it was just my neighbor walking his dog. Evening, Alex, he called. Evening, I replied, shaking off the paranoia. Inside, I sat down and opened a book, but my mind wandered. Maybe a self-defense class wouldn't be a bad idea. Or a really big dog. In the end, the authorities never found Samuel Granger. They believed he retreated deeper into the wilderness, his twisted mission unfinished. But they dismantled his operation, uncovered his crimes. They told me Samuel was a man driven mad by isolation and delusions of ownership over a land that belonged to no one. His motivations rooted in a warped ideology that saw travelers like me as intruders to be eradicated. As for me, I decided future vacations would involve beaches, pina coladas, and lots of people. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted: isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store. Some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything, not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old, things broke, but the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement, something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still. Too still, the kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved. Just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it. Faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least, no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting. But nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump, nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong. But everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large, too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around, nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight, a loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted. The fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. My name is Ben Thorne, and back in 2019, I took my RV up to the dense woods of Tangas National Forest in Alaska. I was a software developer who decided to unplug from the digital world for a while. I'd always been drawn to the tranquility of nature, hoping it would clear my head. I pulled into a secluded spot miles away from the nearest town. The forest was a vast expanse of towering Sitka spruces and western hemlocks, their canopies forming a thick green ceiling above. The scent of damp earth and pine filled the air. I set up camp, unfolded a chair outside my RV, and settled in with a cup of coffee. As I sipped, a beat-up pickup truck rattled down the dirt road and parked a few yards away. A man stepped out, tall, lanky, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. He wore a faded flannel shirt and mud-caked boots. He glanced my way, gave a nod, and began unpacking his gear. I waved back, figuring he was just another camper seeking solitude. "Nice day, isn't it?" I called out. "Sure is," he replied without looking up. I didn't think much of it. People come to places like this to be alone, after all. I returned to my coffee and pulled out a book. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. A couple of hours later, I decided to take a hike. I locked up the RV and headed down a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods. The path was lined with moss-covered rocks and ferns that brushed against my legs as I walked. I felt the world away from everything, just what I needed. About a mile in, I noticed something odd. The usual forest sounds had quieted, no birds, no insects, just an eerie silence. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the time of day. But then I saw it. A campsite just off the trail, tents torn apart and belongings strewn everywhere. I approached cautiously. "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. The ground was littered with clothes, a cooler tipped over, its contents spilled. There was a sense of panic frozen in time. I noticed a smartphone lying in the dirt. Picking it up, I saw the screen was cracked, but it still had battery life. The last photo taken was of a group of friends smiling around a campfire. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I decided to head back and report this to the authorities. As I turned to leave, I heard a twig snap behind me. "Lost?" a voice asked. I spun around to see the man from the pickup truck standing there, a hunting knife dangling from his hand. "Just out for a walk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Came across this campsite. Looks like someone left in a hurry." He glanced over at the wreckage and smirked. "Must have been the bears. They can be nasty around here." "Yeah, maybe I should head back," I replied. He stepped closer. "You know, it's easy to get turned around in these woods." "I'll be fine, thanks." Without another word, I started walking back the way I came. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't dare look back. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. The quiet of the forest was now oppressive. Every rustle felt like a threat. I quickened my pace, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the glint of my RV through the trees. Relief washed over me, but as I stepped into the clearing, I froze. The tires of my RV were slashed and the windows shattered. Supplies were scattered around and the interior was ransacked. Panic set in. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't expect much. Looking for something? The man's voice came from behind me. I looked around to see him standing there, a sinister grin on his face. "What do you want?" I demanded. He shrugged. "Just thought you might need some assistance." "I'm fine," I said, backing toward the RV. He took a step forward. "Doesn't look that way. Shame about your tires." I glanced around for anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy wrench lying near the open toolbox. "Stay back," I warned, grabbing the wrench. He chuckled. "Or what? You'll fix me up?" I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I swung the wrench at him, but he dodged easily, grabbing my arm and twisting it. The wrench fell to the ground. Now, he said, tightening his grip. No need to be unfriendly. I struggled to break free, but his grip was ironclad. He pushed me against the side of the RV, his face inches from mine. "Why are you doing this?" I gasped. He leaned in closer. "Because I can." Summoning all my strength, I stomped hard on his foot. He yelled, loosening his hold just enough for me to break free. I dashed into the RV, slamming the door behind me, locking it. My mind raced. I needed a plan. The keys were still in the ignition, but with slashed tires, driving was out of the question. I searched frantically for anything else that could help. Then I remembered the flare gun stowed in the emergency kit. Grabbing it, I loaded a flare and took a deep breath. The door rattled as he tried to force it open. You can't hide in there forever. I aimed the flare gun at the door, my hand shaking. The door creaked as he applied more pressure. "Come on out, and maybe I'll make it quick," he taunted. The door gave way, swinging open violently. He stood there, knife gleaming. Without thinking, I fired the flare gun. The bright projectile hit him square in the chest, igniting his shirt. He screamed, stumbling backward and dropping the knife. Seizing the opportunity, I bolted past him, sprinting toward the forest. Behind me, I could hear him cursing and thrashing as he tried to extinguish the flames. Branches whipped against my face as I ran blindly through the woods. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare stop. The terrain grew steeper and the underbrush thicker. I tripped over a root, tumbling down a small embankment and landing hard. Groaning, I tried to push myself up when I noticed something partially buried under the leaves. It was a shallow grave, and a decaying hand protruded from the earth. Horror overwhelmed me, but I forced myself to move. I needed to get to civilization, find help. As I stumbled forward, I heard footsteps behind me. He was relentless. "You think you can get away?" His voice echoed. I spotted a narrow creek ahead and waded into it, hoping the water would mask my trail. The cold seeped through my boots, but I pressed on. The creek led me to a gravel road. Relief surged through me. I followed it, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere. After half an hour of walking, I saw lights ahead. It was a small cabin with a truck parked outside. I rushed to the door, pounding on it. An elderly man opened it, surprise evident on his face. "What in tarnation?" "Please, I need help. There's a man trying to kill me." He ushered me inside. "Calm down, son. Tell me what happened." I gave him a quick rundown. He nodded grimly. "You're not the first to come through here with a tale like that." "What do you mean?" "People go missing in these woods. Been happening for years. Folks say it's a hunter gone rogue." Just then, a loud bang came from outside. The old man grabbed a shotgun hanging above the fireplace. "Stay here," he ordered. He stepped out onto the porch. I peered through the window to see the man from the forest standing there, burn marks on his chest, eyes wild. "This doesn't concern you, old-timer," the attacker snarled. "Leave now," the old man warned, cocking the shotgun. A tense standoff ensued. Without warning, the attacker lunged forward. A shot rang out and he fell to the ground. I rushed outside. The attacker lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. "Is he?" I stammered. The old man checked for a pulse and shook his head. It's over. Police arrived later, summoned by a call the old man managed to make before the confrontation. They searched the area and uncovered several shallow graves, confirming the old man's suspicions. Back at the station, I gave my statement. They identified the attacker as Jacob Holloway, a drifter with a history of violence. He'd been living off the grid, preying on unsuspecting campers. As I prepared to leave, an officer handed me a folder. Thought you'd want to know more about him. Inside were newspaper clippings and reports detailing Jacob's past, a dishonorably discharged soldier turned recluse, driven by a twisted sense of vengeance against society. I closed the folder, a sense of finality washing over me. I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died. The night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies, 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone. Come on, Red, we need your experience out here. What could go wrong? I didn't laugh, not this time. So there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding road snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. Red, you still with us? Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow. Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it up ahead. Just barely visible through the fog was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it. But there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. Pete, you see that truck up ahead? Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. There's no truck, Red. Just us. I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front, it wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area. But as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old. Real old. The kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore. And then it hit me. Hard and fast. The paint job. The faded red stripe down the side. The same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. No, I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be Marty's truck. It was gone, destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. Red, you good back there? Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. Yeah, I said finally, my voice shaky. Just seeing things. But I wasn't seeing things. Not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening. The curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again. But this time it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. Red, you gotta help me. The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me. I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead, gone. But that voice, it was his. Down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference. But the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear. But there was nothing, just the thick, swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop, let the fog clear." "Negative, Red. We've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road. The old, rusted cab, the faded red stripe. It was Marty's rig, no doubt about it. But when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fishtailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw Marty's truck." Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. Marty didn't make it. It wasn't Pete. It wasn't Jerry. It was Marty. His voice filled the cab clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty. You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrail through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real." "It's the mountains messing with you," I snapped back. "Messing with me. Don't act like you don't hear him, Pete." Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it. The same curve where Marty had gone over. The same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? "Marty, I'm sorry," I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. "I'm so damn sorry." The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck, in the middle of the road, blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second. My rig skidded, the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "Red?" Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. "You still with us?" "Yeah," I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. "I'm still here." The mountains stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind, and I knew, in some way, he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. My name is Cole Whitaker, and back in 2020, I took my old RV on a much-needed trip to Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. I'd always been more comfortable with a laptop than a map, so my friends joked that I'd get lost the moment I left the driveway. Maybe they were onto something. I was a software engineer who had spent too many late nights debugging code and not enough time enjoying the great outdoors. Figured it was time to trade the glow of a monitor for some real sunshine. Plus, I thought the change might help me come up with the next big app idea. Guy goes into the woods and comes out a millionaire. Well, at least that was the plan. The drive to Wyoming was uneventful, filled with podcasts and my off-key singing. Upon reaching the park, the towering peaks of the Tetons greeted me like old friends I hadn't met yet. I found a cozy spot at an RV campground near Jenny Lake, surrounded by pine trees and the distant sound of water. As I set up camp, a neighboring RV pulled in. Out stepped a middle-aged couple, Mark and Linda Thompson. They were retirees traveling the country, ticking national parks off their bucket list. Mark had a knack for dad jokes. "Why did the camper bring a ladder to the campground?" he asked. "Why?" I played along. Because the stakes were too high. We shared a laugh and they invited me over for dinner. It was nice to have company, and Linda's cooking beat my canned beans any day. The next morning, I decided to hike one of the easier trails. I'm no mountaineer, and my fitness level is best described as computer chair potato. I packed a small bag, filled my water bottle, and set off. About an hour into the hike, I came across a man carving something into a tree. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair that looked like it hadn't met a comb in years. His clothes were worn, stained with dirt, and who knows what else. "Morning," I offered. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me regret opening my mouth. "Beautiful day," he muttered before turning back to his carving. I glanced at the tree. He had etched a series of symbols, circles intersected by jagged lines. It didn't look like the usual hearts and initials people scratch into bark. "Interesting artwork," I said, trying to sound casual. He paused, the knife still pressed against the wood. "Just marking the way," he replied. "Ah, well, have a good one," I said, deciding it was time to keep moving. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach. Maybe it was just the altitude. That evening, back at the campground, I mentioned the encounter to Mark and Linda. "Probably just a local eccentric," Mark said. "Every place has one. Adds character." "Yeah, maybe," I agreed. But Linda seemed concerned. "Be careful out there," she warned. "Not everyone you meet in the woods has good intentions." "Noted," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "I'll make sure to bring my superhero cape next time." The next day, I decided to stay around the campground, maybe do some reading, and finally start that novel I'd been putting off. Around midday, a park ranger named Emily Jacobs stopped by. She was doing her rounds, friendly and full of information about the area's wildlife. "Seen anything interesting?" she asked. "Besides a squirrel stealing my trail mix, not much," I joked. Well, keep an eye out. We've had reports of some vandalism on the trails, strange symbols carved into trees." "Actually, I think I saw some yesterday," I said, recounting my encounter. Her expression grew serious. "Did you get a good look at the person doing it?" "Yeah, tall guy, kind of scruffy, seemed off." "Thanks for letting me know," she said. "We'll keep an eye out." The rest of the day was uneventful until evening rolled around. As I was grilling some burgers, Mark approached me. "Have you seen Linda?" "Not since this morning," I replied. "She went for a walk a few hours ago and hasn't come back." "Maybe she found a good spot to paint," I suggested. Linda was an amateur artist, always sketching. "Yeah, maybe," he said, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "Tell you what, I'll help you look." We set off with flashlights, calling her name as dusk settled into night. The forest seemed to swallow our voices. After an hour of searching, we decided to inform Ranger Jacobs. She organized a small search party, and we continued our efforts. Around midnight, one of the volunteers shouted, "Over here!" We rushed to find them standing near a clearing. On the ground lay Linda's scarf, stained red. Nearby, the same cryptic symbols were carved into several trees, deeper and more aggressive this time. Mark's face went pale. "What the hell is going on?" Ranger Jacobs tried to keep everyone calm. "Let's head back. We'll expand the search at first light." Back at the campground, an uneasy silence settled over us. Mark retreated into his RV, and I could hear muffled sobs through the thin walls. Unable to sleep, I sat outside poking at the dying embers of the fire. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw the man from the trail standing at the edge of my campsite. "You should leave," he whispered. "Excuse me?" "Bad things happen here. Best to move on." "Did you have something to do with Linda's disappearance?" I asked, standing up. He tilted his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. "She's with the forest now." I felt a surge of anger and fear. "Where is she?" "Where?" He took a step back. "Warnings were given," he said before disappearing into the darkness. Heart pounding, I ran to Ranger Jacob's station, bursting in. I found her poring over maps. "I just saw him. The guy carving symbols. He was at my campsite." She grabbed her radio. "Stay here." Within minutes, a few rangers assembled and they headed out to search. I stayed behind, feeling both helpless and frustrated. Hours passed with no word. Just as dawn broke, the rangers returned, their faces grim. "We found something," Emily said. She led me and Mark to another clearing deeper in the woods. There we saw a shallow grave freshly dug up. Inside were remains, clothes matching what Linda had been wearing and bones scattered haphazard. Mark fell to his knees, a guttural cry escaping his lips. I placed a hand on his shoulder, words failing me. "We need to get you both back," Emily said softly. "It's not safe here." As we made our way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The trees seemed to close in, the canopy blocking out the morning light. Back at the campground, law enforcement had arrived. They questioned us separately. I recounted everything. The symbols, the man, his warnings. An officer named Detective Harris took particular interest. "We've been tracking someone matching that description," he said. "Goes by the name of Silas Reed. Former forestry worker who went off the grid after some incidents." "What kind of incidents?" "Several hikers went missing over the past few years. Never enough evidence to pin anything on him, but he's our prime suspect." "Well, he's here, and he's dangerous." "Don't worry," Harris assured me. "We'll find him." They organized a manhunt, officers and rangers combing the forest. Mark was taken to a local hospital. He was in shock. I was advised to leave the area, but something kept me there. Maybe it was guilt, or perhaps a misguided sense of responsibility. Either way, I decided to stay one more night in the RV before heading home. That evening, as the campground emptied, I felt more isolated than ever. The silence was oppressive. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking everything. Around midnight, a loud thud jolted me awake. My heart raced as I listened intently. Another thud, this time closer. Grabbing a kitchen knife, not the most heroic weapon, but better than nothing, I crept toward the front of the RV. Peering through the window, I saw nothing but darkness. Then a whisper cut through the silence. Should have heeded the warnings. I spun around, and there he was inside the RV. Silas stood blocking the exit, his eyes wild and unhinged. "How did you get in here?" I stammered. "Doors only keep out those who respect barriers," he said, stepping closer. "Look, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble found you," he sneered. In a panic, I lunged forward, trying to push past him. He was stronger than he looked, grabbing me by the arm and throwing me against the wall. The knife slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. He picked it up, inspecting it like a curious child. "Not much of a weapon," he mused. Desperate, I looked for anything to use. My eyes landed on a canister of bear spray on the counter. With a quick movement, I grabbed it and aimed. The spray hit him square in the face. He screamed, dropping the knife and clutching his eyes. Seizing the opportunity, I darted past him and out of the RV. I ran blindly into the woods, branches slapping against my face. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps and ragged breathing. "You're only making it worse," he shouted. My lungs burned, but adrenaline kept me moving. Ahead, I spotted a faint light, a ranger station. Pushing myself harder, I burst into the clearing, banging on the door. I yelled for help. The door opened and Emily pulled me inside. "What's going on?" "Silas, he's after me." She locked the door and radioed for backup. "Stay here." We could hear him outside circling the station. "No use hiding," he taunted. "Is there another way out?" I whispered. She shook her head. "But help is on the way." The windows shattered as rocks came flying through. Silas reached in, trying to unlock the door. Emily drew her service weapon. "Stop or I'll shoot," he laughed. "Bullets won't stop what's meant to be." She fired a warning shot, the sound deafening in the small space. He recoiled but didn't retreat. "Backup is minutes away," she said. "We just need to hold out." He began pounding on the walls, the whole structure shaking. I looked around for anything to barricade the door. "Help me with this," I said, pointing to a heavy cabinet. We shoved it against the door just as Silas threw his weight against it. The wood creaked but held firm. Sirens echoed in the distance. Silas seemed to notice his attacks becoming more frantic. "You brought this on yourself," he yelled. Headlights swept over the clearing as police vehicles arrived. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. "Silas Reed, stand down," Detective Harris commanded. Silas backed away from the station, eyes darting between the officers. For a moment, I thought he might surrender. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a rusted hatchet. "They won't stop me," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Last warning," Harris shouted. Silas charged. Multiple shots rang out, and he fell to the ground. Silence settled over the scene, broken only by the crackle of police radios. They approached him cautiously, checking for a pulse. "He's alive," an officer announced. "Get a medic." Relief washed over me, my legs giving out as I sank to the floor. Emily placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over." In the aftermath, authorities searched Silas's makeshift cabin hidden deep within the forest. They found personal belongings from several missing hikers, including Linda. Journals detailed his descent into madness, convinced that the forest demanded sacrifices to preserve its sanctity. Detective Harris later informed me that Silas had been a promising environmentalist before a personal tragedy unhinged him. His wife had died in a hiking accident years prior, and he blamed the influx of tourists for disrupting the natural order. Silas Reed was charged with multiple counts, including murder and kidnapping. With the evidence collected, there was no doubt he'd spend the rest of his life behind bars. As for me, I packed up my RV, ready to return to the familiar glow of computer screens and the hum of city life. Nature, it seemed, was more unpredictable than any line of code I'd ever encountered. I've always prided myself on being the guy who keeps his cool no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip deep into the Blackwater Ridge, Manala National Forest. It was supposed to be a challenge, and I was ready for it. I'd hiked dozens of trails tougher than this, and I wanted to prove that to my old friends, especially Nate, who couldn't even set up a tent without breaking a sweat. But there's something about being miles away from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless trees, that starts to mess with your head. As soon as we arrived, I could feel it. Not that I'd let anyone see that, of course. "Kara, you got the map?" I called out as we packed up the last of the gear. "Yep, but I doubt we'll need it with you in charge," she winked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned. She knew how to stroke my ego, one of the things I loved about her. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling to adjust the straps of his pack. His face was already red, and we hadn't even started walking yet. "Can we take it slow, guys? I haven't done this in a while." "Sure, Nate. We'll pace ourselves," I said, trying to hide my impatience. Sarah, ever the practical one, rolled her eyes but said nothing. She was the scientist of the group, the one who'd be lecturing us about rare plants and ecosystems halfway up the trail. She was here more for research than the hike, but I knew she could handle herself. We hit the trailhead late in the morning, the sun already filtering through the thick canopy above. The first couple of miles were easy enough, well-marked, a few uphill climbs, nothing too rough. Nate fell behind pretty quickly as expected, but we made enough stops to let him catch up. By the time we reached our first campsite, the air had a heavy, oppressive feel. The sun dipped below the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The dense foliage seemed to swallow up the light, leaving us in a strange twilight. We set up camp without much trouble, although Nate complained about the weight of his gear the whole time. Our tents were cheap, sure, but they did the job. Sarah was meticulous, making sure her tent was perfectly aligned with the slope of the ground. "It's going to rain tomorrow," she said, almost as an afterthought. "Clear skies right now," I pointed out, but she just shrugged. Night came quickly, faster than I expected. By the time we had the fire going, the forest had gone almost completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was weird. I'd been in plenty of forests, but something about this one felt off. "You guys hear that?" Nate said, glancing around nervously. "Hear what?" Kara asked, stirring the pot of stew she'd made over the fire. "No, it's like..." I don't know, like something moving out there. I paused, listening. At first, there was nothing, but then I heard it too, soft, distant, and low, a growl almost like the sound of a heavy breath. Coyotes, I said, trying to sound confident. Nothing to worry about. They're probably more scared of us than we are of them. But I saw Sarah tense up. She was studying the woods beyond the firelight, her face set in concentration. I didn't like that. When I turned back to Nate, he was pale, fidgeting with his hands. Maybe we should keep the fire going all night, he said. Relax, Nate. We're fine. Nothing's coming near us. But the truth was, something felt off. Even I couldn't shake it. The second day was rough. The terrain started to get steeper, and the trail was less defined. Nate was falling behind more often, and Kara's enthusiasm was starting to wane. We pressed on, but there was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. Halfway through the day, we found something that made me stop in my tracks. A deer carcass, ripped apart and strewn across the trail. Blood, dark and congealed, soaked into the ground around it. Whatever had killed it wasn't hunting for food. It looked like something had torn it apart just for the hell of it. Nate gagged, turning away. What the hell? Kara knelt beside the body, her face a mix of curiosity and horror. This wasn't a bear. Look at the size of these tracks. I crouched down next to her. She was right. The prints were huge, human-like, but twisted. Something was wrong with the feet. Long, deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her brow furrowed in deep concern. This isn't normal, she whispered. We should go back. The confident TJ, who could handle anything, suddenly felt a sliver of doubt crawl up his spine. Nah, we're fine, I said, brushing it off. It's just some animal. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving. But I knew, we all knew, something was out there, watching. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier just as the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent, something foul. The air felt heavy, thick with unexplainable dread. The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows on the tents, but none of us felt the comfort of its warmth. We sat closer than usual, even Nate, who had barely spoken since we found the deer. I sat there gripping the handle of my knife, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But when I looked at the faces of my friends, I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. Do you hear that? Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. We all went silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind in the trees. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, closer this time. What the hell is that? Nate's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. It's just an animal, I said again, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore. But it wasn't. We all knew that. This was something different, something wrong. From the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved. It was fast, so fast I barely caught a glimpse, but I saw enough. A tall, hunched figure just beyond the ring of light, watching us. Its eyes glowed bright and unnatural. Kara stood up. I'm gonna check it out. No, Sarah hissed, grabbing her arm. Stay here. Don't be stupid. But Kara, always fearless, shook her off and stepped into the darkness. Kara! I shouted, grabbing my flashlight. I scanned the darkness, then I saw it. A tall, gaunt creature with dark, leathery skin and glowing red eyes. It lunged. Kara screamed. We ran, and we never saw her again. My name's Dean Harlow, and back in 2024, I decided to take my RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. I'd been itching for some solitude, a break from the noise of city life. As a freelance photographer, I thought the rugged landscapes would offer the perfect backdrop for my next project. I pulled into the campground late in the afternoon. The towering pines swayed gently, and the distant peaks were dusted with the last remnants of snow. After setting up my RV, I grabbed a cold beer and settled into a folding chair, letting the serenity wash over me. A few other campers were scattered around, but everyone seemed keen on minding their own business. A couple of sites over, an older gentleman was struggling to pitch a tent. He had a wiry beard and wore a flannel shirt that had seen better days. I walked over and offered a hand. Looks like this tent's giving you a hard time, I said, trying to keep a straight face as one of the tent poles wobbled precariously. He chuckled. Yeah, it's got more issues than a newspaper stand. Together, we managed to get his tent upright. He introduced himself as Walter, a retired school teacher exploring the country. We chatted for a bit, swapping stories about our travels. He had a dry sense of humor that I appreciated. As dusk settled, I decided to take a short hike to capture some sunset shots. I grabbed my camera and headed toward a trail that looped around a small lake. The path was narrow, flanked by dense underbrush and the occasional wildflower. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Halfway around the lake, I noticed something odd, a campsite that looked abandoned. A tent stood lopsided, and a smoldering fire pit sent up a thin wisp of smoke. Curious, I approached. There was a backpack lying open, its contents, clothes, a flashlight, some snacks, strewn about as if someone had left in a hurry. "Hello," I called out. No response. I felt a slight unease, but shrugged it off. Maybe they'd gone for a walk and lost track of time. I snapped a few photos of the lake and the surrounding mountains, the sky ablaze with oranges and purples. On my way back, the trail seemed longer, shadows stretching like long fingers in the fading light. I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. Probably just wildlife, I told myself, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Get a grip, Dean," I muttered. Back at the campground, I noticed that Walter's tent was zipped up, no light inside. I assumed he had turned in early. I cooked up some kind chili, ate quickly, and decided to call it a night. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud thud against my RV. My first thought was that a bear had wandered into the campsite. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed and listened intently. Silence. Then a faint scratching sound along the side of the RV. "Great. Just what I need," I whispered. I pulled on my boots and grabbed a sturdy wrench, about the closest thing I had to a weapon. Slowly, I opened the door and shone the flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught nothing but empty picnic tables and the glint of the nearby lake. Just as I was about to step out, something darted past the periphery of the light, a quick, shadowy movement. "Who's there?" I demanded. Silence. I decided against playing hero and retreated back inside, double locking the door. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every creak of the RV seemed amplified, every gust of wind a whisper of something sinister. The next morning, I emerged groggy but determined not to let paranoia ruin my trip. I headed over to Walter's site to see if he'd experienced anything unusual. His tent was open, but he was nowhere to be found. His belongings were scattered, much like the abandoned campsite I had seen the day before. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut. I noticed a set of footprints leading away from his site into the woods. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. The trail led me deeper into the forest, the canopy above thickening and blocking out the sunlight. After about 20 minutes, I stumbled upon a clearing. What I saw made my blood run cold. There in the center was Walter, lying face down, motionless. I rushed over and rolled him onto his back. His eyes stared blankly skyward, a deep gash across his throat. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and congealing. I staggered back, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. People don't just get murdered in national parks, right? Then I noticed something even more disturbing, a playing card pinned to his chest with a knife. It was the Joker. A sick joke. A calling card. Panic kicked in. I had to get help. I fumbled for my phone, but of course there was no signal out here. I decided to head back to the campground to find someone, anyone with a satellite phone or a radio. As I turned to leave, a voice echoed from the trees. Leaving so soon, I spun around, scanning the dense foliage. "Who's there?" I shouted. A man stepped out from behind a tree, dressed in dark clothing. He wore a twisted grin, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "Just a fellow camper," he said, his tone mocking. "Looks like you found my little surprise." "Did you do this?" I asked, rage and fear boiling inside me. He shrugged casually. "You could say Walter and I had a disagreement." I gripped the wrench tighter. "Why?" He tilted his head. "Why not? Everyone's so caught up in their little lives, sometimes they need a wake-up call." "This isn't a joke," I snapped. "You killed him." He laughed. "Oh, you're quick, but don't worry, you're next on my list." Without thinking, I turned and ran. Branches slapped my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I could hear his footsteps behind me, deliberate and unhurried, as if he enjoyed the chase. I burst into the campground, but it was eerily empty. The other RVs and tents were gone, as if they'd vanished overnight. My own RV stood alone. I sprinted inside and locked the door, my mind racing. I had to get out of here. Fumbling with the keys, I started the engine. Just as I put it into gear, the driver's side window shattered. The man's arm reached in, grabbing at me. I swerved the RV violently, trying to dislodge him. He held on, his grip like a vice. Thinking quickly, I slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop threw him forward, and he lost his grip, falling to the ground. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching onto the dirt road that led back to the main highway. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. As I navigated the winding road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. No sign of him. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Up ahead, a fallen tree blocked the path. It hadn't been there before. I skidded to a halt. This had to be a nightmare. I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. He emerged from the woods, that same menacing smile plastered on his face. Going somewhere, he called out. Desperation took over. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit and stepped out of the RV. Stay back, he laughed. Or what? You'll light me up? Go ahead. I aimed and fired. The flare shot out with a hiss, striking him square in the chest. His clothes ignited, flames licking upward. His scream shattered the morning air. I didn't stick around. I jumped back into the RV, threw it into reverse, and took an alternate path I noticed earlier. It was rough and overgrown, but passable. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a ranger station. I stumbled inside, babbling incoherently about Walter and the man. The Rangers sprang into action, radioing for backup. They found Walter's body and signs of the struggle. But the man, he was gone. Only a charred patch of ground remained where he'd stood. Days later, the authorities identified him as Leonard Bates, a drifter with a history of violent crimes across several states. He had a penchant for targeting campers, leaving a Joker card as his signature. They said I'd been lucky. Lucky wasn't the word I'd use. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, Slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well. But now, my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. Jack! The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. Jack, help me! I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is this? No answer. Just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time, clearer, like the static was peeling away. Jack, why didn't you come back? I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. Get a grip, Slick, I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be, just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blinking faintly just off the edge of the road where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. Jack. The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stop it!" I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. "You're not real." But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. "You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown." The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea. And now, here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed, and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive, something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear, "Come back, Jack." The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo, it was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful. And it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences, moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated, and among them I saw Dave, his eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. "You left me." His voice echoed in my head. "You left me to die." I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet. But the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me, not yet, and neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. My name is Drew Thorne, and back in 2024, I decided to take my RV up to the serene landscapes of Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. After years of working as a freelance photographer, I figured a solo trip might spark some much-needed creativity. Plus, who could resist the allure of snow-capped mountains and crystal-clear lakes? I had just turned 35 and felt a bit like a camera without a lens, functional but not quite capturing the full picture. Maybe I was chasing that perfect shot, or maybe I was just running from the monotony of city life. Either way, the open road called, and I answered with a tank full of gas and a Spotify playlist that could rival any road trip mixtape. The drive was spectacular. The Rockies rose in the distance like giants waking from a long slumber. The forests were dense with pine and spruce, their scent wafting through my open window. I even joked to myself that if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around and it's a raft as well, to Instagram it, does it make a sound? Classic dad joke material, I know. By late afternoon, I found the perfect spot to set up camp near Moraine Lake. The water was so blue, it looked like someone had spiked it with food coloring. A few other RVs were scattered about, but there was enough distance between us to feel comfortably isolated. I parked, stretched my legs, and set up a small campfire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I couldn't help but feel content. The night sky was a canvas of stars. I pulled out my camera to capture some long exposure shots. That's when I noticed him, a man standing at the edge of the tree line about 50 yards away. He was tall and lanky, wearing a tattered flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. His hair was unkempt, and his beard looked like it had been growing unchecked for months. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound friendly. He didn't respond, just stood there staring. "If you're looking for the campground, it's a bit further down the road." Still nothing. Just that unsettling gaze. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he didn't hear me or was perhaps just another solo traveler enjoying the wilderness. People come out here to escape, after all. I went back to fiddling with my camera settings, but when I looked up again, he was gone. The forest was still, almost too quiet. I laughed nervously, telling myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe I needed more sleep and less caffeine. The next morning, I decided to hike one of the lesser-known trails to get some unique shots. I packed a small bag with essentials, water, a snack, bear spray just in case, and my trusty camera. The trail was overgrown, which I took as a good sign that not many people tread this path. About an hour into the hike, I came across something odd. A makeshift campsite that looked recently abandoned. There was a fire pit with ashes still warm, and a tarp hung between two trees serving as a rudimentary shelter. Scattered around were empty cans of food and a rusted hunting knife stuck into a tree stump. I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't uncommon for backpackers to set up impromptu camps, but something about this felt off. Then I noticed the carvings on the trees, strange symbols and what looked like tally marks. Maybe it was time to head back. As I turned to leave, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, and there he was, the man from last night. Up close, his appearance was even more disheveled. His eyes were sunken, and his nails were caked with dirt. "Didn't mean to trespass," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was just leaving." He tilted his head, a creepy smile spreading across his face. "City folk don't belong here," he muttered. "Fair enough, I'll get out of your hair." I started to walk away when he stepped in front of me. "You got any food?" he asked. "Just a granola bar," I replied, reaching into my bag. I handed it to him, hoping that would appease him. He snatched it, but didn't move aside. "You got anything else? Batteries? A map?" "Sorry, that's all I've got." He stared at me for what felt like an eternity before stepping aside. I didn't waste any time and hurried back down the trail. As I distanced myself, I could hear him laughing, a low, unsettling chuckle that echoed through the trees. Back at the RV, I locked the doors and decided it might be best to find a new spot to camp. As I started the engine, a piece of paper fluttered under the windshield wiper. I got out to retrieve it. It was a note scrawled in messy handwriting. "You're not welcome here." Okay, message received. I tossed the note and got back into the RV. Just as I was about to pull away, I saw him again in the side mirror, standing at the tree line, watching me with that same twisted grin. I drove for about half an hour to another campsite closer to the main road and with more people around. Safety in numbers, I told myself. The rest of the day was uneventful, which was a relief. I even managed to get some great shots of the sunset over the mountains. That night, I joined a group of fellow campers around a communal fire pit. There was Tom and Lisa, a retired couple traveling in their decked-out RV, and Mark, a college student backpacking across Canada. We shared stories, laughed at Mark's terrible puns, and for a moment, the strange encounters of the day faded away. "Why did the photographer get lost in the mountains?" Mark joked. "Because he couldn't find the right focus." We groaned in unison. "Stick to your day job, Mark," Lisa chuckled. As the fire dwindled, we all agreed to call it a night. I returned to my RV feeling more at ease. Crawling into bed, I left a small light on, just in case. Sometime around midnight, a loud banging jolted me awake. It sounded like someone was hitting the side of the RV with a heavy object. My heart raced as I grabbed the bear spray from the table. "Who's there?" I shouted. No response. The banging continued, more aggressive this time. I peeked through the window but couldn't see anything in the darkness. Gathering my courage, I decided to step outside, bear spray in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The moment I opened the door, I was met with silence. The night was still, the only sound being the distant chirping of crickets. I shone the flashlight around but saw nothing unusual. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement near Tom and Lisa's RV. I walked over cautiously. Their door was wide open. "Tom? Lisa?" I called out. No answer. I stepped inside and was met with a chilling scene. The interior was trashed, furniture overturned, belongings strewn about, and there on the floor were Tom and Lisa. They weren't moving. I rushed over to check for a pulse, but it was clear they were gone. Deep gashes marked their bodies, and the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Panic surged through me. I needed to find help. As I backed out of the RV, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to see the man, his face splattered with blood, wielding the same rusted hunting knife I had seen earlier. "Why are you doing this?" I yelled, trying to keep distance between us. He smirked. "City folk need to learn their place." I didn't wait for further explanation. I sprinted toward Mark's tent, which was a few yards away. "Mark, wake up!" I screamed. Mark stumbled out, disoriented. "What's going on? No time to explain? We need to get out of here." Before we could move, the man lunged at Mark, slashing his arm. Mark cried out in pain, falling to the ground. I unleashed the bear spray directly into the attacker's face. He recoiled, screaming in agony. "Come on!" I grabbed Mark and we ran toward my RV. We barricaded ourselves inside. Mark was bleeding badly. I tore a piece of cloth to wrap around his wound. "Stay with me," I urged. The man began pounding on the door. The RV shook with each hit. "You can't hide forever," he taunted. Desperate, I remembered the flare gun I kept in the emergency kit. I grabbed it and signaled through the window, hoping someone would see it. Minutes felt like hours. The pounding continued and the doors started to give way. Just as the latch broke, sirens wailed in the distance. The man hesitated, then disappeared into the night. Paramedics arrived shortly after. Apparently, someone had seen the flare and called for help. Mark was taken to the hospital, and I gave my statement to the authorities. They conducted a search and found more evidence of the man's crimes, a hidden shack deep in the woods filled with stolen items and disturbing photographs. Turns out he'd been preying on campers for months, if not years. His name was revealed to be Elias Granger, a former park ranger gone rogue after losing his job due to misconduct. With a deep-seated grudge against tourists, he took it upon himself to cleanse the park of outsiders. Elias was eventually caught trying to flee across the border. He was charged with multiple counts, including murder and assault. As for me, I decided that perhaps solo RV trips weren't my thing anymore. Maybe next time, I'll stick to photographing cityscapes. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed. Complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine: gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured. Probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them. Carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it, a soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning. Endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondacks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once and you'll start seeing it everywhere. I laughed, shaking my head. Local ghost stories. The man didn't smile. It's not a story, it's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same. He took a step closer. I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right and something's not right here. I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. What do you mean? You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it, he turned, starting back down the trail. Just don't stay too long. I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here, but no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite, the same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the Ader, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. My name is Eli Reed, and back in 2019, I decided to take my newly acquired RV on a journey through the winding roads of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. After years behind a desk crunching numbers, I thought some fresh air and open spaces might do me good. Besides, how hard could camping be? It's like living at home, but with more trees and fewer takeout options. I stocked the RV, affectionately named Old Bessie, with all the essentials: canned beans, a questionable amount of beef jerky, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. My friends joked that I'd be back within a day, begging for Wi-Fi and a hot shower. I was determined to prove them wrong, or at least not get eaten by a bear. Spoiler alert, bears were the least of my worries. The first day was uneventful, which in my book was a win. I found a secluded spot by a clear stream, set up camp, and even managed to start a fire without singing my eyebrows off. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat outside sipping instant coffee, feeling like a rugged outdoorsman despite wearing socks with sandals. The next morning, I decided to explore a nearby trail, armed with a map I could barely read and a compass I pretended to understand. I set off. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and my heavy breathing as I realized I was more out of shape than I thought. I stumbled upon a small waterfall and couldn't help but make a self-deprecating joke about finally finding the shower I needed. As I headed back, I noticed a roughly-looking man chopping wood near a dilapidated cabin I had somehow missed earlier. He was tall and lean with a wild beard that suggested razors hadn't been invented yet. "Howdy," I called out, trying to sound casual. He looked up, his eyes sharp. "Didn't expect to see anyone around these parts." "Yeah, just doing some camping," I replied. "Name's Sam." He paused before responding. "Walter, nice to meet you." Walter didn't know anyone lived out here. He gave a curt nod. "Been here a long time." An awkward silence followed. "Well, I'll let you get back to it," I said, backing away slowly. "Be careful out here," he said cryptically. "Strangers can get lost." "Thanks for the tip," I muttered, turning on my heel as I walked away. I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were still on me. That evening, I tried to brush off the encounter. Maybe he was just the hermit who wasn't used to company. I settled into the RV, locked the doors because that's what you do in the middle of nowhere, and tried to read a book. Sleep came uneasily, with strange noises outside making me jump at every creak. Around midnight, I heard footsteps circling the RV. My heart pounded. I grabbed the closest thing resembling a weapon, a cast iron skillet, and held my breath. The footsteps stopped, and a faint scratching sound began near the door. Summoning what little courage I had, I flung the door open, skillet raised. No one was there. Feeling foolish, I stepped outside. The night was eerily quiet, too quiet. I decided it was just a raccoon or maybe a particularly bold squirrel. As I turned to go back in, something caught my eye. A small carved wooden figurine placed on the step. It was shaped like a human skull. "Very funny," I said aloud, hoping it was some prank by other campers. The next morning, I decided to find Walter. Maybe he knew if there were other people around. Plus, returning his creepy knickknack seemed like a good excuse. I headed toward the cabin, but found it deserted. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Windows were shattered, the door hung off its hinges, and nature was reclaiming the structure. A chill ran down my spine. Had I imagined him? No, we definitely spoke. As I examined the cabin, I noticed something disturbing. Photographs pinned to a wall inside, all of different people who looked like hikers or campers. Some were crossed out in red ink. I snapped a photo with my phone, hands shaking. Time to leave, I thought. As I backed away, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around to see Walter emerging from the trees, a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "I was just poking around where you shouldn't be," he interrupted. I glanced at the rifle. "Look, I didn't mean any harm." He raised the gun slightly. City folks never do. Without another word, I bolted. Adrenaline surged as I sprinted toward my RV. Branches whipped my face and rocks threatened to trip me. With every step, I could hear him behind me, his boots pounding the earth. "Can't run forever," he shouted. Challenge accepted, and I thought grimly. I reached old Bessie and fumbled with the keys. My hands were slick with sweat. Finally, the door unlocked and I dove inside. I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine sputtered but didn't start. "Not now, Bessie, come on." I glanced out the window to see Walter emerging from the woods, raising his rifle. I ducked as a shot rang out, the bullet shattering the side mirror. "Third time's the charm," I muttered, turning the key again. The engine roared to life. I slammed the RV into gear and stomped on the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as I sped down the dirt road. Another shot hit the rear window, spiderwebbing the glass. I gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white. The narrow road twisted and turned, and the RV groaned in protest. I didn't care if I blew a tire or wrecked the suspension. I needed to get as far away as possible. After what felt like hours, I spotted a ranger station ahead. Relief washed over me. I pulled in recklessly, nearly hitting a parked Jeep. I stumbled out shouting incoherently. A park ranger rushed out to meet me. "Sir, are you okay?" "There's a man. He's trying to kill me," I gasped. The ranger guided me inside. "Calm down and tell me what happened." As I recounted the events, 2 more rangers joined us. They exchanged grim looks. "You're not the first to report something like this," one said. "Who is he?" I demanded. "Name's Walter Griggs," the first ranger replied. "Used to be a hunter until he lost his family in a fire. Been living off the grid ever since. Folks say he's not right in the head. That's putting it mildly, I retorted. We'll send a team out to find him, the ranger assured me. In the meantime, you should stay here. I nodded, exhaustion hitting me like a freight train. They offered me a cot in the back room. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but make a dark joke to myself. Next time I want solitude, I'll just lock myself in the office supply closet. The Rangers weren't able to locate Walter that night. The following morning, they escorted me back to my RV. The damage was worse than I thought. Tires slashed, windows broken, and the words "no escape" carved into the driver's side door. Looks like I'm not driving out of here, I said. Riley, we can arrange for a tow, the ranger offered. Appreciate it. While we waited, I asked if they had any more information on Walter. Legend has that he blames outsiders for what happened to his family, the ranger explained. Thinks the government or tourists had something to do with it. He's been a ghost in these woods for years. Great, I had to run into the one-man welcoming committee. The tow truck arrived, and soon old Bessie and I were on our way back to civilization. As we pulled onto the main road, I took one last look at the dense forest. Part of me half expected to see Walter standing at the tree line, rifle in hand, but there was nothing, just the sway of the trees in the wind. Back in town, I filed a report with the local authorities. They assured me they'd keep an eye out, but admitted that finding him in that vast wilderness was like finding a needle in a haystack. Fantastic, I sighed. At least needles don't usually shoot at you. With my RV in the shop and my nerve shot, I checked into a motel. The receptionist gave me a curious look as I walked in, probably due to the disheveled appearance and the lingering smell of fear. Rough day? She asked. You could say that, I replied. Got any rooms where the only thing I have to worry about is bad room service? She smiled sympathetically. I'll see what I can do. That night, I ordered an overpriced burger and flipped through channels aimlessly. A news report caught my attention. Local authorities are investigating reports of a man threatening campers in the Great Smoky Mountains. No kidding, I muttered. The next morning, I got a call from the ranger station. They'd found more evidence at Walter's cabin, personal belongings from missing hikers, and a makeshift journal detailing his plans to cleanse the woods of intruders. He's a real piece of work, I said. We advise you to stay away from the area until we apprehend him, the ranger cautioned. Don't have to tell me twice. With my RV still under repair, I decided it was time to head home. Maybe the concrete jungle wasn't so bad after all. At least the only predators there were aggressive taxi drivers and the occasional pigeon with a grudge. As I boarded the bus out of town, I couldn't resist making one last joke to the driver. Any chance this thing is bulletproof? He gave me a puzzled look. No. Figures, I said, taking a seat. The bus pulled away and I watched as the mountains faded into the distance. I thought about Walter Griggs, a man consumed by his own madness, turning his pain into violence against strangers. His motivations were his own, twisted and dark, but that was behind me now. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and decided that my next vacation would be somewhere safer, like a nice quiet beach. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul. Just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit. The kind of tired that sneaks up on you, where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally, I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff, no names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go. But the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold. Too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone, just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. Frank. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. Come on, I muttered, trying to stay calm. Don't do this to me now. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out of here, on foot, if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restrooms and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building. The carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Frank. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures. No man in the coat. Just the voice, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Frank, you need to stay. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it. Low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore. Not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. My name is Finn Thompson, and back in 2020, I decided to take my RV out to the remote stretches of the Badlands National Park in South Dakota. Being a city dweller from Chicago, I thought some solitude might help clear my head, a sort of detox from the daily grind. Funny how the promise of peace can lead you straight into chaos. I've always been a fan of open spaces. Maybe it's because my apartment overlooks a brick wall, or perhaps it's the allure of horizons that don't end in skyscrapers. Either way, I packed up my RV with the essentials. Canned beans, a stack of paperbacks I'd been meaning to read, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The drive was uneventful, which is more than I can say for most road trips I've taken. No flat tires, no wrong turns, just mile after mile of asphalt leading me away from the buzz of the city. As I pulled into the park, the rugged beauty of the Badlands stretched out before me. Jagged rock formations painted in hues of red and orange. The kind of place that makes you feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I found a secluded spot to park the RV, away from the handful of other campers sprinkled throughout the area. Privacy was the goal after all. Setting up camp was a breeze. I even managed to assemble a folding chair without losing a finger, a personal victory considering my track record with DIY projects. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a small campfire. The crackling of the wood was the only sound for miles, or so I thought. Just as I was getting comfortable, a rustling noise came from behind a nearby cluster of shrubs. Probably just the wind, I told myself, or maybe a rabbit. I wasn't exactly versed in the local wildlife, but I figured nothing out here would be too keen on bothering me. First night in the wilderness, and I'm already jumping at shadows, I muttered, shaking my head. I took a sip of liquor coffee and decided to call it a night. Sleep came surprisingly easy, but it didn't last long. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a distant scream, a sharp, piercing cry that echoed through the stillness. I sat up, heart pounding. Probably just a coyote, I whispered, though deep down I knew that wasn't the howl of an animal. Curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the cool night air. The campgrounds were enveloped in darkness, the kind that swallows the beam of a flashlight whole. I scanned the area but saw nothing unusual. "Is anyone out there?" I called out, immediately realizing how cliché it sounded. No response, just the gentle whisper of the wind against the rock formations. I shrugged it off and headed back inside. Next time, maybe pack a sense of courage, I joked to myself, attempting to lighten the mood. The next morning, I decided to do a bit of hiking. The trails were well marked, and I figured a daytime adventure would be less unnerving. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I'd hear the crunch of gravel behind me, but when I turned around, the path was empty. "Get a grip, Oliver. You're not the star of some thriller novel," I tried myself. About an hour into the hike, I came across something that made my stomach churn. A campsite that looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. A tent collapsed, belongings scattered, and a half-burned-out fire still smoldering. Maybe they left in a rush, emergency perhaps, I used aloud, but the eerie silence suggested otherwise. I noticed a backpack leaning against the tree. Unable to quell my curiosity, I unzipped it to find a wallet with an ID. Mark Stevenson, a guy not much older than me. There were also keys, a phone with a dead battery, and a notebook filled with sketches of the surrounding landscapes. Doesn't look like someone who planned to leave, I thought. A rustling sound snapped me out of my thoughts. This time it was unmistakably close. I spun around, but again, nothing. "All right, joke's over," I shouted, half expecting someone to jump out laughing, but there was only silence. Deciding it was best to head back, I started retracing my steps. The feeling of being watched intensified. Every crunch of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Then I saw it. A figure in the distance, partially concealed behind a rock. I couldn't make out any features, but it was definitely a person. "Hey, you okay over there?" I called out. No response. The figure remained still. "Listen, if you're lost, I can help," I offered, taking a cautious step forward. Without warning, the figure darted behind the rock and out of sight. "Well, that's not ominous at all," I muttered. I picked up the pace, eager to get back to the safety of my RV. As I neared the campsite, a metallic smell hit me, sharp and unmistakable. Blood. My heart raced. As I approached my RV, the door was ajar, which I was certain had been closed. Inside the place was a mess. Drawers pulled out, belongings strewn about, and on the small kitchenette table lay a hunting knife stained red. "Okay, this is officially the worst vacation ever," I whispered. Panic creeping in, a noise from the back of the RV made me freeze. Footsteps. Someone was still inside. Thinking quickly, I grabbed a heavy flashlight, my only potential weapon, and prepared myself. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. Then a low chuckle emanated from the shadows of the hallway leading to the bedroom area. "Not funny, man. Show yourself," I shouted. A tall figure stepped into the dim light. A man with a gaunt face, dirty clothes, and eyes that seemed devoid of any humanity. "Looking for something?" He sneered. "Listen, take whatever you want and leave." "I don't want any trouble," I said, gripping the flashlight tighter. He tilted his head, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "But I've already found what I want." Without warning, he lunged at me. I swung the flashlight, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled back, but recovered quickly. "Feisty one, aren't you?" he taunted. I didn't wait for his next move. I bolted out of the RV, sprinting toward the main road. My mind raced. There was no one around for miles, and my cell phone was inside. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps gaining. "You can't run forever," he yelled, laughter trailing his words. Spotting a cluster of rocks ahead, I veered off the path and ducked behind them, trying to catch my breath. "Great plan, Oliver. Lead the psycho to an isolated spot," I chastised myself. I scanned the area for anything I could use as a weapon. Nothing but rocks and dirt. The footsteps slowed. He was close. "Why make this hard on yourself?" His voice echoed desperate. I remembered the small multi-tool in my pocket, a Swiss Army knife I brought along for minor repairs. Hardly intimidating, but better than nothing. As he approached, I steadied my breathing. The moment he rounded the corner, I kicked up a cloud of dust into his eyes. He snarled, rubbing his face. Seizing the opportunity, I plunged the small blade into his thigh. He let out a hollow cry of pain. "That's going to leave a mark," I quipped, adrenaline fueling my sarcasm. He swung wildly, but I dodged and took off again, heading toward the abandoned campsite I had seen earlier. Maybe there was something there I could use. Reaching the site, I frantically searched the scattered belongings. Then I saw it, a flare gun half buried under a sleeping bag. "Time to light up your life," I muttered, grabbing it. He emerged from the trail, limping but no less menacing. "You're making me angry, and you wouldn't like me when I'm angry," he growled. "Did you really just quote the Hulk?" "Points for style, I guess," I shot back. He charged at me, and I fired the flare gun. The bright projectile hit him square in the chest, igniting his shirt. He screamed desperately, trying to pat out the flames. Not wasting any time, I ran past him, heading back toward the main road. Smoke filled the air, and his screams faded into the distance. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights, a park ranger's vehicle making its evening rounds. I stumbled onto the road, waving my arms. "Whoa, there, are you all right?" The ranger asked, stepping out. "There's a man back there." "He attacked me. I think he killed someone," I gasped. "Slow down. Where is he now?" The ranger pressed. "At the abandoned campsite about 2 miles back." "We need to call for backup," I insisted. He radioed for assistance and helped me into the vehicle. As we drove back, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering dread. When we reached the site, there was no sign of the man, just the charred remains of his shirt and bloodstains on the ground. A team arrived shortly after and began a thorough search. Over the next few hours, they uncovered a shallow grave not far from the campsite. Inside were the remains of Mark Stevenson and another unidentified victim. "Looks like you stumbled upon something big," the lead investigator told me. "We've been tracking reports of missing hikers in this area for months." "Who is he?" I asked. "Name's Victor Reynolds," he replied. "Former military gone rogue, wanted for multiple counts of murder." In that moment, it all clicked. The abandoned campsite, the eerie feeling of being watched, the calculated way he hunted me. "Well, I always wanted a memorable vacation," I said, attempting a weak smile. The investigator shook his head. "You're lucky to be alive." I nodded, exhaustion washing over me as they continued their work. I realized that sometimes the peace we seek comes with unexpected dangers, and perhaps next time I'd stick to crowded beaches. I'd been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice, a rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night, but every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here, something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old, faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there. Always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. My name is Everett Sinclair, and back in 2019, I decided to take my RV on a trip to Big Bend National Park in Texas after years of designing corporate logos. I thought a little desert solitude might spark some creativity, plus who doesn't love the idea of waking up to a sunrise over the Chisos Mountains? I rolled into the park on a Tuesday afternoon, the sun casting a warm glow over the rugged landscape. My RV, an old but reliable beast, affectionately named Bessie, chugged along as I searched for the perfect spot to set up camp. I finally found a secluded area near the Rio Grande, fair enough from other campers to enjoy some peace, but close enough to a ranger station in case my cooking went catastrophically wrong, which given my culinary skills was a real possibility. After setting up, I pulled out a folding chair and cracked open a cold beer. The desert had a way of making you feel both insignificant and alive at the same time. As I watched the sky turn shades of pink and orange, I thought about how much time I had spent cooped up indoors, missing out on moments like this. The first night was uneventful, filled with the sounds of distant say, oyotes, and the rustling of nocturnal critters. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I decided to hike one of the lesser-known trails, shopping to find inspiration for a project that was due soon, armed with a sketchbook and a granola bar. I set off into the arid landscape. The trail was quiet, save for the occasional lizard scurrying across my path about an hour in. I met an older man named Hank who was heading the opposite way. He wore a battered cowboy hat and had a gray beard that reached his chest. Watch out for the sun, it's unforgiving this time of year. Head V's. Duido ira plidan if you see me turning into a lobster on your way back, feel free to drag. Met a shuckle deal as the day wore on, the heat intensified. I found a shaded spot under a rock overhang to stand, pulled out my sketchbook. It tried to capture the stark beauty of the desert, but my drawings looked more like abstract art than anything recognizable. Maybe modern art was my calling after all. Heading back to the RV, I noticed something odd, a faint trail of smoke rising in the distance. It seemed out of place, but I shrugged it off, attributing it to another camper's fire that evening. As I was attempting to grill some chicken, which ended up more charcoal than cuisine, I heard footsteps approaching, expecting another friendly face. It turned with a smile. Evening, I said. A man stood at the edge of my campsite. He was tall and lean, wearing a dusty jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Evening, he replied. His voice was flat, devoid of the casual friendliness I'd come to expect from fellow travelers. Can I help you with something? I asked, just passing through. He said, though he didn't move, his eyes scanned over my RV and equipment. 12 safe travels. Then I offered, hoping he'd take the hint. They lingered a moment longer before nodding and walking away into the fading light. An uneasy feeling was in my stomach. Maybe it was the undercooked chicken, but something about him seemed off. I decided to lock up the RV that night, a departure from my usual carefree routine. As I lay in bed, the desert silence felt the heavier than before. Every rustle outside seemed amplified around midnight. I was jolted awake by a loud bang. I set of heart pounding. It sounded like something had hit the side of the RV. Grabbing flashlight, I peered out the window but saw nothing, probably just a fallen branch. I muttered, thought there weren't any trees nearby. Unable to shake the feeling, I decided to step outside for a look. The cool night air hit me. I scanned the area with my flashlight. The beam caught something glinting on the ground. I walked over and found a hunting knife embedded in the dirt, its blade stained dark. What I whispered, a chilling laugh echoed from somewhere in the darkness. I couldn't pinpoint the direction. Who's there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I kid toward the RV, keeping the flashlight moving in arcs. Just as I reached the door, a figure emerged from behind a boulder, a man holding air. It was the same guy from earlier. Fun nights just getting started, he said, a sinister smile creeping across his face. Without thinking, I dove into the RV and slammed the door shut as a gunshot rang out. The bullet pierced the side windows, shattering shards of glass. Not good, I muttered, scrambling to start the engine. Bessie roared to life, and it floored the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, tires kicking up dust in the side. My roar, I saw the man sprinting after me, but he quickly faded into the darkness. I drove aimlessly, my only goal to get as far away as possible after what felt like hours. I realized I was low on fuel. The nearest town was at least 30 miles away, and the fuel gauge was flirting with empty up ahead. Is off faint lights, a small cluster of buildings that looked like an abandoned service station. Desperate, I pulled in, hoping to find someone or at least a working phone. The place was deserted. Old gas pumps stood like relics, and the windows of the building were boarded up. I cursed. Dur my breath, deciding I had another option. I searched around and found rusted fuel can near the back entrance. Miraculously, it had some gas left. As I was siphoning the fuel into the RV, I heard the unmistakable rumble of an engine approaching. A froze hard pounding. A pickup truck pulled into the station. Headlights off. It was him. You're making this too easy, he called out, stepping out of the truck with his rifle in hand. I ducked behind the RV, adrenaline surging. My mind raced. It needed a plan. Spotting a pile of old tires nearby, an idea formed. I grabbed a rag from my pockets, died into the fuel can spout and lit it with my trusty Zippo, a souvenir from college. I never thought I'd use this way. Fire in the hole, I whispered, assessing the makeshift Molotov cocktail toward his truck. Thin landed under the vehicle, and exploded, flames engulfing the underside. He shouted in surprise, momentarily distracted, seizing the moment. I jumped into the RV and gunned it. The engine sputtered, but held as a sped away. Is a wint the mirror that his truck was a ball of fire. He stood beside, fury etched on his face. That's one hot pickup line. I quipped to myself the absurdity of the joke, giving me strange sense of calm amid the chaos. I drove until the RV finally gave out, the engine overheating from the strain. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. Grabbing my backpack and a tire iron for protection, I set off on foot, following the road in hopes of finding help. After an hour of walking, I came across a small farmhouse. Exhausted, I knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered. Here, eyes widening at the sight of me, disheveled, dirty, and probably looking half crazed. Ma'am, I need help, someone's after. Mir blurred out. She hesitated, but then nodded, ushering me inside. I'll call the sheriffs, he said, as I waited, sipping the glass of water she offered. I noticed family photos on the wall, happy faces, graduations, weddings. A pang of longing hit me. Maybe it was time to spend less time alone on the road. The sheriff arrived as Toutman with a stern expression. I recounted the night's events as she took note. Sounds like you've had quite the ordeal, he said. We've had reports of a drifter causing trouble in these parts. You're lucky to be alive, luckier than my, I replied. Hem-and-aged? Asmal smile. We'll send a deputy to retrieve it. In the meantime, you can rest at the station at the sheriff's office. I was given a spare coat in the back room despite the uncomfortable setting. I fell into a deep sleep. I woke to the sound of hushed voices peering out. I saw the sheriff speaking with a deputy. Found him near the old service station. The deputy said, dead, burned up, pretty bad because of death. Sheriff, asked gunshot wound, seems someone else got at him. A chill ran down my spine. Who else was out there? The sheriff noticed me. Miss Sinclair seems the man who was after you isn't. Olongarath. What happened? Not sure yet. We're investigating. Over the next few days, more details emerged. The man was identified as Lucas Mendoza, a notorious drug runner using the remote areas to move his product. The authorities suspected rival smugglers had taken him out in a strange twist. The knife I'd found was linked to several unsolved crimes in the area. My encounter had inadvertently helped close multiple cases. Before I left town, the sheriff pulled me aside. You did good out. There, note everyone has the wits to handle a situation like that. Well, I'd prefer my future adventures to be less life-threatening. I said. He chuckled. Can't argue with that. I rented a car and headed back home, deciding that maybe the open road could wait. As I drove away, I couldn't help but think about Hank, the friendly old man I'd met on the trail. I hoped he was okay. A week later, I received a package at my doorstep. Inside was my sketchbook, which I had left behind in the RV. Tucked between the pages was a note. Easterisk. Everett figured you'd want this back. Keep chasing those sunsets, Hank. Hesterisk. Guys, mild, great for the kindness of strangers. As for Lou, Cas Mendoza, I later learned he had been part of a larger criminal network. His downfall led to several arrests, crippling the operation. Sometimes life hands you a plot twist you never saw coming, and sometimes you end up being a small part of a bigger story without adventuring. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels under heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, the place I'd picked to spend a week, just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. The solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it, the cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. I stepped out into the icy air, my breath fogging in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching out into the distance where the trees disappeared into a blur of white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged out onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, the auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were starting to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it, a light, faintly flickering and coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the ice in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved slow and steady, as if something was drifting beneath the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and regular, like a lantern swaying beneath the ice. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again, always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection of something from the sky, but deep down, I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound, something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I'd drilled the day before. Something was off. There, by the edge of the hole, was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in a jagged line, as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the cold water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine. but there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again, louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice, closer than before. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire stories to scare the newcomers. But now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake that looked abandoned. But there were fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing the door open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night, moving beneath the surface." "Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't. And that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know. But I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath the RV began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. And then, in the distance, the surface of the ice exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark and enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it, the weight of something massive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped, but the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried. And whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet. My name is Jack McCall, and back in 2021, I decided to take a solo RV trip to the remote stretches of the Yukon Territory in Canada. I was looking for solitude, a break from my hectic life as a software engineer who'd spent too many years staring at screens. I thought some time in the wild would clear my head. I had been on the road for a week when I stumbled upon a place called Tombstone Territorial Park. The name had a certain dark allure, but the breathtaking vistas of jagged peaks and alpine meadows convinced me to set up camp there. The park was vast and seemed untouched by the usual throng of tourists. It was perfect. On my first evening, I parked my RV near a serene lake that reflected the towering mountains like a mirror. As I set up my portable grill, a beat-up pickup truck rattled down the dirt road and parked about 100 yards away. A man stepped out, tall, lanky, with a mess of unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. He looked like he hadn't seen a shower or a friendly face in weeks. "Evening," I called out, trying to be neighborly. He glanced my way but didn't respond. Instead, he unloaded some gear from his truck. A shovel, rope, and what looked like a large plastic tarp. Not exactly your standard camping equipment. I chuckled to myself, thinking he must be an extreme outdoorsman or perhaps a hunter. As darkness settled in, I grilled a couple of burgers and sat back to enjoy the silence. That's when I noticed the man was digging furiously, almost obsessively. The sound of the shovel hitting the rocky ground echoed through the still night. I told myself he was probably just setting up a fire pit or maybe digging a latrine. Everyone has their quirks. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to hike one of the trails I'd read about. Stepping outside, I saw that the man's truck was still there, but there was no sign of him. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wandered over to his campsite. What I saw made me pause. The ground was disturbed in several places, and there were small mounds of freshly dug earth. It looked like graves. "Must be some kind of survivalist thing," I muttered, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I set out on my hike, the crisp mountain air doing wonders for my mood. The trail led me through dense forests and open meadows dotted with wildflowers. Hours passed, and by the time I returned, the sun was dipping low. As I approached my RV, I noticed something odd. My door was ajar. I was certain I'd locked it. Stepping inside cautiously, I found the place rummaged through. Clothes were strewn about, cabinets left open, and my food supplies raided. Anger flared up. Who would do this? Then I spotted it, a muddy boot print near the doorway. It was large, probably size 12 or 13. My thoughts immediately went to the man with the pickup truck. Determined to confront him, I marched over to his campsite, but his truck was gone. The only thing left was the disturbed earth and a lingering sense of unease. "Real mature," I grumbled. "Steal my stuff and take off." I decided to report the incident to the park rangers the next day. For now, I just wanted to secure my RV and get some rest. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every rustle of the wind sounded amplified, every creak of the RV a potential intruder. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint scraping noise coming from underneath the vehicle. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The night was eerily silent. Crouching down, I shone the light under the RV, but saw nothing except dirt and shadows. "Get a grip, Jack," I told myself. "You're jumping at ghosts." I headed back in, double-checking that all doors and windows were locked. Morning arrived with a thick fog enveloping the landscape. I decided it was best to head to the nearest ranger station. As I started the engine, the RV sputtered but didn't turn over. "Come on," I groaned, trying again. Nothing. Popping the hood, I discovered that several wires had been cut. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Who the hell is doing this? A cold realization washed over me. I was stranded. Weighing my options, I remembered passing a small town about 20 miles back before entering the park. With no cell reception in this remote area, hiking there was my only choice. I packed a day pack with essentials: water, some snacks, a map, and a pocket knife. Locking up the RV as best as I could, I set off along the dirt road. The fog made everything look the same, but I was confident in my sense of direction. A couple of hours into the trek, I spotted something on the side of the road, a piece of torn fabric fluttering on a bush. It looked like part of a shirt, stained dark. I picked it up, and a sickening metallic smell confirmed my fears. It was blood. Maybe someone was injured, I thought, trying to stay rational. Pressing on, I soon came across more unsettling signs. Scratches on tree trunks at human height and deep footprints in the muddy ground. Boots, similar to the print I'd found in my RV. Then in a small clearing, I saw it. A shallow grave partially covered with branches and leaves. My stomach churned as I approached. Peering in, I saw the unmistakable form of a human hand, pale and lifeless. I stumbled back, horror gripping me. This was no accident. Someone was hunting people. A rustling sound snapped me out of my shock. Turning around, I saw him, the man from the pickup truck, standing about 50 feet away, holding a hunting rifle aimed directly at me. Going somewhere? He drawled, a sinister smile spreading across his face. My mind raced. I don't want any trouble, I managed to say, raising my hands. He chuckled. Trouble? Oh, you found plenty of that already. Without thinking, I bolted into the woods. Adrenaline surged as branches whipped against my face and arms. Behind me, a gunshot rang out, the bullet thudding into a tree trunk inches from my head. Run all you want, he shouted. Makes it more fun. I zigzagged through the forest, trying to make myself a difficult target. The terrain was rough, and the fog made visibility poor. My lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. Another shot echoed, this one hitting the ground near my feet, spraying dirt into the air. Desperate, I spotted a rocky outcrop ahead and scrambled toward it, sliding into a narrow crevice between boulders. I held my breath. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. He was toying with me. You can't hide forever, his voice sang out mockingly. I know these woods better than anyone. I glanced around, searching for anything that could help. My pocket knife was a joke against his rifle, but then I noticed a large, jagged rock within arm's reach. As his footsteps drew nearer, I gripped the rock tightly. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He stepped into view, rifle at the ready. There you are, he sneered. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged forward, swinging the rock at his head. The impact caught him off guard, and he stumbled back, dropping the rifle. I didn't hesitate. I tackled him, and we both tumbled to the ground. He was stronger, but panic gave me an edge. We grappled fiercely, rolling over rough terrain. He landed a punch to my jaw, stars exploding in my vision. I retaliated by slamming the rock into his shoulder, eliciting a grunt of pain. You think you can beat me? He growled. We both scrambled for the rifle lying just out of reach. I kicked his leg, causing him to falter and seize the weapon. Stay back, I warned, aiming it at him. He laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. Go ahead, do it. My hands shook. I had never fired a gun at anyone before. In that split second of hesitation, he lunged at me again. Instinct took over and I pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted me as he fell backward, clutching his abdomen. He lay on the ground, gasping. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining the earth. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Gripping the rifle tightly, I ran toward the road, not stopping until I saw the outlines of buildings through the fog. It was the small town I'd remembered. Bursting into the local general store, I must have looked like a man, disheveled, bloodied, and clutching a rifle. Help! There's a man! He tried to kill me! I shouted. The store clerk, an elderly man with kind eyes, quickly called the authorities. Within the hour, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived. I recounted everything, from the break-in to the shallow grave and the confrontation. They organized a search party and headed back into the park. I insisted on going with them, needing to make sure it was over. When we reached the spot where the confrontation had occurred, the man was gone. Only a pool of blood and disturbed earth marked the site. Looks like he couldn't have gotten far, one of the officers said. Following the trail, we eventually found him collapsed near one of the shallow graves. He was dead. As they secured the scene, another officer called out, "Over here." We gathered around another grave and another. In total, they found 4 bodies, all in various stages of decomposition. Back in town, I was treated for minor injuries. The police took my statement and thanked me for helping to stop a serial killer who had eluded capture for years. His name, I later learned, was Victor Langley, a former hunter turned murderer. He'd been using the remote wilderness as his hunting ground, preying on unsuspecting travelers. The authorities uncovered evidence at his makeshift campsite, trophies from his victims, personal belongings, and a journal detailing his gruesome exploits. With the ordeal over, I arranged to have my RV towed and repaired. The open road no longer held the same appeal. As I prepared to leave, the store clerk handed me a small package. "Found this among your things," he said. It was my pocket knife, the one I thought I'd lost. "Thanks," I replied, pocketing it. Driving away from Tombstone Territorial Park, I couldn't shake the irony that I'd come seeking solitude, but found something far more sinister. I didn't look back. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while, the hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Ben Grady, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking's simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I'd picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick, suited guy, one of those corporate types. Barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No stops, no questions. I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate, too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce, well, you don't say no to easy money. Now, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses, but otherwise it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway. Nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road, but something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it. Just keep driving, get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. Simple. But then the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First, the cab was freezing. Then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs are built to last, but every now and then something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in. But as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it. A soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing. Probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there. But heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops, no questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again. I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Ben," a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. The voice on the radio, though, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. "Who the hell is this?" The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. "Ben, you need to stop." I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank, someone screwing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast. But that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer. But all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its taillights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted. Maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first. Not the musty smell of old cargo, but something far worse. A stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty. But then, I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, Hunched in the shadows was a figure. It was humanoid but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall. Its back to me, but I could hear it breathing shallow and rapid. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned its face, if you could call it that. It was a mess of raw red flesh, eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened in a wet, gaping maw, and I heard a low, guttural hiss escape its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me. Each step was punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock. My fingers trembled so hard I could barely get it secured. The thing inside let out a shriek, a sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What had they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, get away from here. But I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hand shaking. "This is Ben Grady." I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. "I need help. There's something in my trailer." Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. "Ben, you need to stop." My voice, clearer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifting into gear and pulling back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Just away. Away from that thing, away from whatever nightmare I'd gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder. My breath was visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. "Ben, it's too late." I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking. The engine sputtered as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down, like whatever was inside was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped dead in the middle of the highway. The engine cut out. The lights flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled. Something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer, no sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. My name is Jake Harris, and in 2010, I took my RV to the quiet corners of Sinni National Park in British Columbia. I'd been craving some solitude, just me, the open road, and nature's finest. You could say I was trying to escape the constant buzz of my email notifications, which seemed to have a personal vendetta against my sanity. The drive up was picturesque. Towering pines lined the winding roads, and the mountains stood like guardians watching over the valleys. I even joked to myself that if the trees could talk, they'd probably tell me to slow down and enjoy the view, or maybe ask for a ride to the next forest. I pulled into a secluded spot by a serene lake, the kind of place postcards failed to capture adequately. There were a few other RVs scattered around, but everyone seemed to respect the unspoken code of campers. A friendly nod, but enough distance to feel like you had the world to yourself. After setting up, I decided to take a short hike to stretch my legs. I met an older couple, the Thompsons, who were returning from the trail. They warned me about the uneven paths ahead. "Careful now," Mr. Thompson said with a grin. The rocks here like to play tricks on your ankles. I chuckled, assuring them I'd keep an eye out for any mischievous stones. The trail was more rugged than I'd anticipated. Roots jutted out like nature's tripwires, and the canopy above filtered the sunlight into a calming, dappled pattern on the ground. About an hour in, I stumbled upon something that made me pause, a small campsite that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The tent was tattered and gear was strewn about as if someone left in a hurry. It gave me the creeps, so I decided to head back. Back at my RV, evening settled in. I cooked up some chili, adding a dash of hot sauce, because why not live a little dangerously? As I ate, I noticed a man at a distance chopping wood with vigorous swings. He was tall and muscular with a scruffy beard that suggested he wasn't a fan of razors or mirrors for that matter. I waved, but he didn't acknowledge me. Friendly neighborhood lumberjack, I muttered. Or maybe he just really hates trees. As darkness enveloped the campsite, I settled into my RV with a book. The silence was comforting until it was interrupted by a loud thud against my RV. Startled, I put down my book and listened. Nothing. Probably just a pine cone acting out its life's grand finale. Minutes later, another thud, this time harder. Okay, maybe the pine cones here lift weights, I joked to myself, trying to shake off the unease. I stepped outside with my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but revealed nothing unusual, just the silhouettes of trees and the quiet RVs of fellow campers. I decided to call it a night. Crawling into bed, I reminded myself that the wilderness has its own set of noises, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing faint rustling outside, and my mind conjured images of wild animals rummaging through my stuff. Great, I didn't bring snacks for the bears, I thought. Just as I was drifting off, a sharp scream pierced the night. I shot up hard, pounding. It sounded human. I grabbed my flashlight and hesitated. Should I investigate or stay put? My conscience got the better of me. If someone was in trouble, I couldn't ignore it. Stepping out into the cold night, I noticed that the other RVs were dark and silent. Anyone else hear that? I whispered, knowing full well I wouldn't get a response. I headed in the direction I thought the scream had come from, each step weighed down by a mix of fear and responsibility. As I moved deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon a clearing. The moonlight revealed a chilling scene, a woman lying motionless on the ground. I rushed over, checking for a pulse, but there was none. Her eyes stared blankly into the void, and a deep gash crossed her neck. My stomach lurched. This was no accident. Panicking, I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but realized I had left it back in the RV. Of course, I mumbled. Perfect time to embrace minimalism, Jake. I needed to alert the others, get back to safety. Turning to retrace my steps, I heard the unmistakable crunch of leaves behind me. I swung the flashlight around, its beam dancing erratically. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. Out of the shadows stepped the man I'd seen chopping wood earlier. His shirt was stained, and not with tree sap. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly, his eyes void of emotion. "Look, someone is hurt. We needed to get help," I stammered. He tilted his head, a sinister smirk forming. "Help out here? No one's coming." Realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't a coincidence. "What did you do?" I demanded, trying to inch away without provoking him. He pulled out a hunting knife, its blade glinting ominously. "Just cleaning up the area. Outsiders bring trouble." I swallowed hard. Funny, I thought the same about guys with knives in the dark. Without another word, he lunged at me. Adrenaline kicked in, and I dodged the blade, narrowly missing me. I didn't wait for a second chance. I sprinted back towards the campsite, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I could hear his heavy footsteps gaining. "You can't run forever," he shouted. "Wasn't planning on it," I yelled back. Spotting a fallen branch ahead, I scooped it up on the move, hoping it would serve as some kind of defense. Reaching the edge of the campsite, I noticed the other RVs were gone. Wheels had been hastily turned, tracks leading back to the main road. "Thanks for the heads up, folks," I muttered bitterly. I dashed into my RV, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I searched for my keys. Come on, I urged myself. A loud bang shook the RV as the man slammed against the door. "You think a door will stop me?" He sneered. "Actually, I was hoping it would slow you down," I retorted. Finally finding the keys, I jammed them into the ignition. The engine sputtered but didn't start. Not now, I promise I'll get regular oil changes from now on. He began pounding on the windows, cracks forming with each hit. Desperate, I remembered the flare gun I kept in the glove compartment for emergencies. This qualifies, I told myself. Grabbing the flare gun, I aimed at the door just as he broke through. His eyes widened in surprise. "Smile for the flash," I quipped before pulling the trigger. The flare hit him square in the chest, igniting his shirt. He stumbled back, screaming as flames engulfed him. Not wasting the moment, I tried the engine again. This time it roared to life. "Third time's the charm," I said, flooring the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward and I sped down the rough path back toward the main road. My heart hammered in my chest, but relief began to wash over me. That is, until I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. "You've got to be kidding me," I groaned. A pickup truck barreled down the path behind me, closing the distance. Bullets pinged off the back of the RV, and I swerved erratically to make myself a harder target. Up ahead, I spotted a narrow bridge over a deep ravine. An idea sparked. "Time to see if this RV has wings," I joked nervously. I sped toward the bridge, the truck hot on my tail. Just as I crossed the midpoint, I jerked the wheel sharply to the right. The RV smashed through the flimsy guardrail and plummeted downward. I braced myself as the world turned upside down. The RV crashed into the thick foliage below the impact, knocking the wind out of me. Everything went dark. I woke to the sound of dripping water and the scent of gasoline. Pain shot through my body, but I was alive. "Guess gravity and I have a complicated relationship," I mumbled. Crawling out of the wreckage, I heard footsteps above. The man peered over the edge of the ravine, his face illuminated by the flames of his still smoldering shirt. "You're a persistent one," Seth, he shouted. "Pot calling the kettle black," I yelled back. I needed to move. I stumbled through the forest, each step a battle against pain and disorientation. Ahead, I saw lights. Headlights from a road. Mustering every ounce of strength, I made my way toward them. Bursting out onto the pavement, I waved frantically at an approaching car. The vehicle screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, looked at me in shock. "Please, I need help," I pleaded. She unlocked the door, and I climbed in. "There's a man. He's trying to kill me," I explained hurriedly. As we sped away, I glanced back to see the man standing at the edge of the forest, his figure disappearing into the darkness. At the nearest town, I went straight to the police station. Officers took my statement, though their skeptical glances were hard to miss. "We've had no reports of any missing persons or murders," one of them said. "Check the campsite." "There's a woman's body," I insisted. A search team was dispatched, but they found nothing. No body, no signs of struggle, just the charred remains of my RV at the bottom of the ravine. "It's like you were the only one out there," the officer remarked, frustrated. I couldn't believe it. "He must have moved everything," I said, though it sounded weak even to my own ears. With little evidence, there wasn't much the authorities could do. I was left with more questions than answers. Refusing to let it go, I did some digging on my own. Local rumors spoke of a former park ranger named Victor Hale, who went off the grid years ago after being accused of misconduct. They said he believed the park belonged to him and that outsiders were a threat to its purity. In the final sentence of the last newspaper article I found, it mentioned that Victor was never apprehended and was presumed to be hiding somewhere within the vast expanse of the park, eliminating anyone he considered a trespasser. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore are fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker. A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now, it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere, no path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. Okay, I muttered, you've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off, his clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail. It moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate?" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." The forest? I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, But when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside. Water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. My name is Jay McCarthy, and in 2020, I decided to take a solo RV trip to the remote stretches of the Yukon Territory in Canada. I'd always been drawn to the solitude of the wilderness, a chance to escape the constant buzz of city life. This time, I wanted to clear my head after a tough breakup and maybe find some peace in the quiet expanse of nature. The drive up was long but beautiful. The dense forests, towering mountains, and winding rivers were a welcome sight. I set up camp near Glen National Park, an area known for its glaciers and rugged terrain but not overcrowded with tourists. The spot was perfect, a clearing surrounded by tall pines with a clear view of the distant snow-capped peaks. After settling in, I decided to explore the nearby trails. The fresh air filled my lungs as I hiked through the forest, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional bird call. I came across a small stream with crystal clear water and stopped to rest. Sitting there, I felt a rare sense of tranquility. On my way back to the RV, I noticed something odd, a rusted hunting trap lying just off the path. It seemed old but recently disturbed. I didn't think much of it, chalking it up to leftover equipment from hunters or trappers. That evening, I built a campfire and cooked a simple meal. As darkness settled, the forest became eerily quiet. The stars were brilliant overhead, and I found myself lost in their glow until the crack of a branch snapped me back to reality. Probably just wildlife, I told myself. The next morning, I decided to venture farther out. I packed a day's worth of supplies and headed north. The trail became less defined and the signs of human passage faded. About midday, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, with moss-covered logs and a roof caving in on one side. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the door, hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the cabin was sparse, just a broken table and a few scattered tools. Then I saw the walls. They were covered in newspaper clippings and photographs. Stepping closer, I realized the clippings were about missing persons, all from different parts of Canada and Alaska. An uneasy feeling crept over me. The photographs were of people, campers, hikers, even locals, all looking happy and unaware. Some had red X's marked across them. I felt like an intruder in someone else's twisted world. I decided it was time to head back. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A notebook on the floor partially hidden under debris. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. It was a journal filled with meticulous notes about tracking movements, habits, and patterns of various people. Dates matched the times when some of the individuals had gone missing. A sense of urgency overtook me. I needed to get out of there and inform the authorities. Clutching the notebook, I exited the cabin and started back toward my RV. The forest seemed different now, darker, more confining. Every sound was amplified. I quickened my pace, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then I heard it, a distant whistle, the kind someone would use to signal. I glanced back but saw nothing. Picking up speed, I moved as quickly as the terrain would allow. Suddenly, a figure stepped onto the path ahead of me. He was tall and rugged, with unkempt hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He wore a tattered coat and carried a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. "Lost?" he asked with a rough voice. "Just heading back to my camp," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart pounded in my chest. "Not many folks come this way," he said, eyeing me up and down. His gaze settled hell on the notebook in my hand. I noticed his eyes narrow. "Found this back there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Figured it might belong to someone." He took a step closer. "That's so mind if I take a look?" "Actually, I'm in a bit of a hurry," I said, starting to move past him. He blocked my path. "It's not safe out here alone." "I'll manage," I replied, attempting to sidestep him. Without warning, he grabbed my arm with a grip like a vice. "I insist." Adrenaline surged through me. I wrenched my arm free and broke into a run. Behind me, I heard him curse and give chase. The forest blurred as I dodged trees and jumped over roots. The heavy footsteps behind me were getting closer. A shot rang out, splintering a tree trunk to my right. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to focus. Up ahead, I spotted a ravine with a fallen log bridging it. I sprinted toward it, hoping to put some distance between us. I scrambled across the log, the drop below steep and unforgiving. Halfway across, another shot echoed and the log shuddered. I didn't look back. Reaching the other side, I continued running. My lungs burned and every muscle screamed, but I couldn't stop. The forest began to thin, and I recognized the landmark, a peculiar rock formation I noted earlier. Relief washed over me. The RV was less than a mile away. Bursting into the clearing, I dashed toward my vehicle. Fumbling with the keys, I heard footsteps emerging from the forest edge. I managed to unlock the door and threw myself inside, slamming it shut, just as the man reached the clearing. He stood there, a sinister smile creeping across his face. Instead of approaching, he simply watched as I started the engine. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, motionless. I drove straight to the nearest town, which was several hours away. At the local police station, I handed over the notebook and recounted everything. The officers exchanged glances, and one of them sighed. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said. Over the next few days, an investigation was launched. They found the cabin but reported that it was empty. No clippings, no photographs, nothing. It was as if someone had cleared it out. Frustrated, I insisted on the evidence I had seen. The notebook was the only tangible proof, and it was filled with the disturbing observations I had discovered. The authorities took it seriously enough to keep the case open. Back home, I couldn't shake what had happened. I started digging into missing persons reports in the Yukon and neighboring regions. Patterns began to emerge, disappearances that happened annually, always around the same area. I learned that the man I encountered was likely Elias Kincaid, a former wilderness guide who went off the grid years ago after being suspected in several vanishings. He was never charged due to lack of evidence. It became clear that Elias was hunting people using the vast wilderness as his cover. His motivation seemed rooted in a twisted desire for dominance and control, viewing the wilderness as his domain to enforce as he saw fit. I shared my findings with the authorities, but without concrete evidence of his current activities, their hands were tied. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Months later, news broke of a hiker who had gone missing in the same area. A search party found remains and signs of foul play. This time, with increased pressure, the authorities conducted a more thorough search and eventually apprehended Elias in a remote part of the forest. In the end, Elias Concaide was charged with multiple accounts related to kidnapping and murder. The notebook I had found played a crucial role in linking him to the crimes. As for me, I haven't returned to the wilderness since. The open skies and towering pines no longer hold the same allure. After the trial, it was revealed that Elias believed he was the rightful protector of the land, removing those he deemed unworthy of experiencing its beauty. His delusions drove him to commit unspeakable acts against unsuspecting travelers. I suppose if there's any dark humor to be found, it's that my quest for solitude led me straight into the path of a man who despised intruders. Talk about getting away from it all.